microfono. Oh, eccoci ragazzi. Tutto. Sì, sta andando tutto un sacco, sta andando una figata. Raga, è un po' che non streamo, sono gasatissimo io. Non so voi, ma io sono gasatissimo. C'ho la voce a pezzi, ve lo dico subito. Quindi prendo il microfono, me lo avvicino, così no, mi prende troppo, capire un po'. È come un po' che non streamo, che non ci vediamo. Sono contento di vedermi. Io per un cazzo stavo così bene senza passare la vita attaccato ai videogiochi, e so già che da settimana prossima, per i prossimi 2 mesi, la mia vita tornerà ancora. Mi sveglio la mattina, apriamo POE, che magari nel trade c'è qualcosa che non ho visto e facciamo in modo di vederlo e cose così. E niente, iniziamo. Purtroppo ho finito allenamento di karate tardissimo e quindi anziché poter vedere la roba in live, così, ok, invece di poterla vedere in live su Twitch, che la stanno facendo, porca vacca, e io non la posso, cioè l'ho dovuta fermare perché non l'hanno ancora finita sti deficienti, e non avendola ancora finita non è diventato un VOD perché hanno avuto dei problemi tecnici, e quindi non è diventato un VOD e quindi non è. Guarda che l'hanno finita. Wow. No, da qua. Oh, guarda che figo. Allora noi ci mettiamo a qua, direi tipo. Ok raga, mancano 30 secondi. No, volevo un attimo allora volevo un attimo sistemare le cose. Quindi posso chiudere questo, qua posso riaprirlo, posso togliere la musica. Tanto la musica direi che non ci serve, Ok, sta andando. Fammi tornare indietro di un pochino, che devo ancora sistemare 2 cose. Poi lo faccio partire. No, volevo solo dirvi. Vediamo se si sente un po' la. Sì, si sente tutto, perfetto. Volevo solo dirvi che purtroppo ho fatto tardi e quindi niente, ce lo riguardiamo tutto insieme, tutto in un colpo solo, visto che ci sono stati problemi tecnici. Noi li saltiamo e vediamo. Io sono gasato, ho avuto già uno spoiler che, porca vacca, ho letto Discord mentre tornavo a casa, mi hanno detto una cosa, che è tornata una cosa, e poi avrei voluto vederla in diretta. Tutto il resto non so niente perché poi ho chiuso Discord e non ho più guardato niente, non voglio sapere nulla. Allora vado un attimo a buttare via la tazza del tè, questa, la roba lì, e poi partiamo. Contate circa sto minuto che si parte. Hi, I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games. Non vedo l'ora, raga. Ok, sono gasatissimo, sono terrorizzato comunque. L'idea che tra una settimana cominci già la nuova lega. Se fosse cominciata fra un mese, la mia vita ne avrebbe giovato tantissimo. Pronti? Pronti, raga? 10 secondi, Facciamo di andare tranquilli. Madonna. Aspetta che prendo la copertina. La copertina. Qua, raga, oggi ha nevicato tutto il giorno. Non so se lo sapete, ma è tutto il giorno che nevica. Fa un freddo porco, e anche se in casa si sta bene, io oggi mi faccio tutto lo stream con la copertina. Oh, guarda che bella. Madonna, mi sento troppo una vecchia così. Con la copertina. Via. 3, 2. Madonna, sono gasatissimo.
I'm Chris Wilson from Grinding Gear Games. Thanks for joining us for today's Path of Exile livestream. We have a packed show today, with announcements for Path of Exile 2, as well as the exclusive unveiling of Path of Exile Affliction, which launches on December 8th on PC and Mac, and on December 13th
Path of
on
Exile
console.
2 me ne frega fino a un
Twitch
certo
drops are enabled
punto.
on today's live stream, so make sure you follow the instructions below in order
Queste
to
sono le
claim
ali che si vincono, fanno schifo, ma meglio di niente, raga.
We'll start with Path of Exile 2.
Vanno prese
Majority
oggi,
will walk you through our latest announcements. Mark will then take you on a deep dive into the new Path of Exile Affliction Challenge League, which launches in 1 week. He'll cover the league mechanics, its rewards, some new content we're adding to the core Path of Exile experience, and some large metagame changes. I'll then show you our annual core supporter packs, and we'll head into our live Q&A session where Ziggy D will ask us your questions from Twitch chat. After the live stream, we'll drop the full patch notes.
I'd like to hand over to Jonathan Rogers, Game Director of Path of Exile 2.
Hey guys, it's been a few months since we introduced you to the Druid in Path of Exile 2, but one of the things that we're really focusing on now is how varied each of the classes feels to play. The Monk darts around quickly from enemy to enemy, building and unleashing combos. If he doesn't stay in combat, he loses momentum and has to build it up again.
Sono i sottotitoli magari che riesco a farvi vedere. Qua,
The Warrior, on the other hand, is like a slow but unstoppable freight train. A warrior commits to big attacks and relies on stunning his enemies to stay safe.
sta dicendo le varie differenze delle classi, ma come playstyle.
A warrior can use even larger attacks to demolish his enemies.
Ma io non ci credo a sta cosa, perché alla fine dipende dalla skill gem che usi, non dalla classe che sei, almeno nell'1. E non credo che il 2
The
cambi
Huntress
così.
seamlessly moves from melee to ranged combat and back.
Fanno
The
vedere
true damage
tutte.
potential of the
Questa è
Huntress is only
l'Huntress.
unlocked when you learn to combine ranged and melee abilities together.
Range e melee.
And then there are the spellcasters. The Sorceress is a pure caster who much prefers to
Sorcerer?
stay at range and drop powerful spells on her foes. If she finds herself surrounded by enemies, she would rather use an ability to escape than to take them on directly.
Questo era il Nintendrils. Pompato.
The Druid is also a spellcaster, but unlike the Sorceress, he uses his spells as a means to support his melee abilities. And by melee abilities, we mean he can turn into a giant animal and rip his enemies to pieces.
Dici che il druido è uno spellcaster ma che usa magie. Aspetta, ho fatto un errore. Porca Giuda, non era quello che volevo fare. Dice che il druido è uno spellcaster ma che usa le magie per supportare i suoi attacchi in melee. Che è il mio archetipo preferito e che è un archetipo che non ha mai funzionato nei videogiochi. Purtroppo.
Each of these classes feels extremely different to play, but we want to go even further. It's time to check out the Mercenary.
There's not a job out there I
Mercenario.
won't take, so long as the pay's good and a crossbow can solve it.
Comunque non lo so, tutti gasatissimi per la crossbow. Ma a me tra la crossbow e l'arco non ci vedo nessuna differenza stilistica.
I'll take 'em all down, one bolt at a time.
When thinking about each new class, we really try to think about how we can make combat feel different from all the others.
Però io
The Mercenary, that difference is the crossbow. A crossbow is fundamentally
Odio
different
l'arco.
than a regular bow because it fires instantly instead of needing to be drawn back. This means that you need immediate feedback. Clicking the fire button should make the character shoot instantly, just like in a shooter. As soon as we experience that,
Ok, dicono che la differenza tra la balestra e l'arco è che la balestra quando schiacci spara. L'arco invece devi tirarlo. Però, cioè, non so se avete mai visto una build fatta con un arco in POE. Tu schiacci e spara, cioè non cambia niente.
we realize that there are a lot of design lessons to learn from shooters, and so we fully embraced them. In Path of Exile 2, we have crossbows that work like sniper rifles, shotguns, and assault rifles.
Ci sono anche i fucili. Ah, sono balestre che funzionano come i fucili. Una con lo sniper, una con l'assault, che è questo qua, e una con lo shotgun, che è quello che fa.
Get shooter-like gameplay, we wanted to go further. In Path of Exile 2, we now support WASD movement. You can now walk around in any
Puoi
direction.
muoverti con
independent of anything.
USD,
In fact,
USD.
if this is your preferred method of gameplay, you can use it on any class, regardless of what weapon type you're
E
using.
poi ti muovi così e
You
spari
can
col
change between
mouse.
click to move or WASD at any time.
Ah, WSD potrebbe essere carino, ma ti ciuccia
You can
4
only hold
tasti.
2 crossbows at a time, but Path of Exile 2 is all about interesting combinations of abilities.
Minchia,
This
usano
is
fino alla
where ammo
T qua.
skills come in. This is a burst shot crossbow, and right now I have armor piercing ammo equipped, which makes it very effective when facing a group of enemies, since it pierces right through them.
Dice che gli ha messo il Pierce.
But there are other ammos too. For a bigger single target, it might be a good idea to switch to Incendiary.
Ah, puoi cambiare
The
le
more projectiles hit the target,
i
the stronger the
proiettili, puoi
ignite. So
cambiare.
you'll want to get up nice, close and personal with this one.
Che però praticamente... Allora, cioè, puoi usare le armi in un certo modo, facendo la mitragliatrice, il fucile a cecchino, lo shotgun. Poi puoi cambiare i proiettili in modo che facciano altre cose. Poi probabilmente anche le skill faranno qualcosa, o la skills è tipo il proiettile. Boh.
If you have a bunch of targets running at you, you might want to slow them down. In this case, you could switch to Permafrost Burst Shot.
Ci sono anche i
Shooting a
proiettili
bunch
che
of
rallenti, che fanno
smaller
crowd
enemies at range will
control.
chill them, and potentially even freeze them in place. Once you have some frozen enemies though, you can switch back to Armor Piercing. Shooting a frozen enemy with Armor Piercing Burst Shot will explode the ice, doing a huge amount of damage to all nearby enemies.
E dice che sì, li puoi scombare. Non ci vedo niente di particolare, è quello il fatto. Ma proprio niente di
Another
particolare.
feature crossbows have is attachments. This is a grenade launcher. As you can see, when I equip it, it appears on the underside of the crossbow. These attachments are just
E
like skill gems,
lanciagranate.
so you effectively get extra skill slots. And you can augment these with support gems, just like regular skills.
Ah sì, sono skill, cioè solo che anziché chiamare skill le chiama proiettili.
These grenades take a while to explode, so it's a good idea to pair them with some kind of crowd control, like Permafrost Burst Shot.
Non puoi spararle di là dai muri? O sì? No.
We have other grenades too, though.
Muri-
This attachment is a flash grenade. It does barely any
Saranno una
damage, but
bella
it does a
rogna.
huge amount of stun.
Ok,
It can be
questa è
a
la
great
granata che
before you run into
stunna.
combat.
E non fa quasi una cippa di danno, ho detto. Quindi non la userà nessuno. Questa è l'arma che non userà nessuno.
Now, here's another attachment, an oil grenade. Firing one of these grenades
E c'hanno
coats
i
the ground
link,
of nearby
ok.
enemies in oil. Oil slows enemies down, so it's another useful crowd control mechanic.
Sembra assurda, come, cioè è uno stile di gioco troppo diverso da POE. Non è assolutamente detto che se uno gioca a POE possa piacergli
Now,
POE
another thing
2.
that oil can do is be set on fire. Any burning enemy or explosion will ignite the oil, causing extra burning damage.
Cioè è molto, da come lo descrivono, è molto combinato. Tipo qua dice usa la granata dell'olio, poi usa il proiettile, quello del
One of the problems
fire.
with burst shot crossbows is that each pellet doesn't do much damage individually. This means that if enemies have armor, then it will be very effective preventing that damage. But thankfully, you can equip an additional crossbow in your second weapon set to deal with the weaknesses of your primary weapon. This is a rapid shot crossbow. Rapid shot is
Dice
great
che
for
puoi
closing on
equipaggiarne
enemies
due
because you
diverse in
can
modo
shoot
che
while
facciano
running.
cose diverse.
In Path of Exile 2, we now have the ability to allow you to use some skills while moving. Being able to create skills like this opens up a lot of new design space and allows us to really increase the pace of combat.
Possono usare skill mentre ti muovi in POE 2, lo sto facendo vedere adesso. Sì, ma le skill instant le potevi usare instant. Non lo so, cioè
The
ci vedo.
armor-piercing version of Rapid Shot slowly erodes a monster's armor. Once the armor is fully broken, you can easily switch back to Burst Shot to deal much more damage.
Posso dire la verità? Cioè, a me sto POE 2 non mi gasa per niente. Nel senso, non che sia brutto, ma è totalmente un altro gioco da POE 1. Uno cioè, potevano chiamarlo con un altro nome e sarebbe stata esattamente la stessa cosa, secondo me. Poi, magari quello che fanno vedere loro non è quello che è veramente, perché se tipo vai nello shop e cerchi di comprare qualcosa, ti fa vedere il video di, non lo so, un MTX per gli effetti del weapon, ti fa vedere il video di uno che va in giro e attacca gli zombie uno a uno. Non lo farai mai in POE, e magari la stessa cosa è qua. Ma sembra, cioè, si sta concentrando sul, non lo so, le differenze tra la crossbow e l'arco. E quindi, cioè, l'arco non fa esattamente la stessa cosa? Non c'è una skill dell'arco che spara tipo split arrow, che spara a cazzo? Non c'è una skill tipo barrage che fa ta 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 ta? Non so se si chiama barrage, magari sbaglio. Mi sembra che si chiami barrage. Non c'è una skill che fa proprio, non mi ricordo che se era punturing o qualcosa, che fa tipo sniper rifle, cioè cecchino, che tira un colpo fortissimo. È solo che me li metti su una balestra. Io non ci vedo veramente, non lo so, saranno 5 minuti, 10 minuti di trailer, vedere un personaggio che spara con una balestra e fa esattamente le stesse cose che facevi prima con l'arco. Però adesso si chiamano ammo e granate, anziché chiamarle trappole e skill. Cioè, non lo so, non ci vedo. Non ci vedo davvero questa grande cosa. In compenso il gioco mi sembra un gioco totalmente diverso da POE e non riesco neanche a farci paragoni. Cioè, l'unico paragone è la UI è brutta come era brutta quella di POE. L'unica cosa che veramente avrebbero dovuto cambiare del tutto e farla completamente diversa, perché sono passati 10 anni, me l'hanno tenuta uguale. E non sono gasatissimo POE 2. Invece sono gasatissimo per l'idea di POE 1 della 323. Io è quello che aspetto.
Being able to run while shooting with rapid shot is also great for when you want to perform a
Poi
fighting
raga,
retreat.
magari sarà la cosa più figherrima del mondo e io sarò felicissimo di giocarci
Using
tutto il giorno,
permafrost
tutti i
ammo with
giorni.
rapid shot is also useful if you need to retreat. When you shoot the ground, it creates ice crystals. If you draw monsters back over these crystals, they explode, chilling the monsters. It's
Hai
great if you
capito?
want to set up a safe
Nessuno
zone
in
before
POE
your
farebbe
next
mai una cosa del genere. Cioè, non esiste che vai indietro, una roba in più, ma sì c'è, ma io vado avanti e sparo.
Slowing enemies down can come in
Vado
handy if
avanti
you
e
want to use
già
an
che devo fermarmi mi
incendiary
girano le
version of
balle,
Power
figurati che
Shot.
vado indietro.
Using this skill requires that you charge up a little bit before it fires, but as it continues to heat up, it will do more and more damage.
Queste sono quelle channeling, però ti ci puoi muovere, cioè questa è una figata.
It has a really large clip size, so you can just keep firing and firing with it.
Questa è una
Another really
bella
useful feature
skill.
is that when the crossbow is heated up, it adds extra fire damage to any grenade that you launch.
Se riuscissi a colpire qualcuno con queste granate. Oh,
Now I've been using explosive grenades here, but it will work equally as well with flash or oil grenades too. If you use it with oil grenades, the oil will catch fire immediately.
immaginavo. Lo fai con LOL, cioè. Non lo so, per me è un altro gioco. Cioè, veramente paragonabile a Guild Wars 1 e 2. Non a Diablo 1 e 2, ma a Guild Wars. Cioè, la differenza è quella, tra uno e l'altro. L'unica cosa che hanno in comune sono le MTX.
Another crossbow type that you can find is Power
Che non
Shot.
vedo l'ora di vedere quelle
This one
nuove,
works
raga.
just like a classic sniper rifle. Use it with armor-piercing ammo and it will penetrate armor on targets. So it's a good idea to use when something's really tough.
Questa è quella da cecchino. Si spara un colpo secchissimo. Infatti contro tanta gente la
Now
sta
this skill has
pigliando.
another interesting interaction with armor break. If an enemy has its armor broken, then your power shot hits a weak spot and does a huge amount of single target damage, with a bunch of extra
Come
stuff.
sempre puoi combinare tutto. Io e due è fatto sul combinare le cose tra di loro. Bonza.
Now, the incendiary version of power shot is more like a rocket launcher. It does a big explosive blast at a distance.
È bello, Però non ci vedo proprio nessuna somiglianza con POE. Non riesco a gasarmi a dire wow, finalmente POE fatto
One of the
meglio,
really
no?
useful features of this version is that you can explode any grenades that
È un
happen to be
altro
on the
gioco.
ground.
E io non so se mi piacerà sto gioco perché è veramente tanto diverso. C'è la lore uguale. È come giocare a LOL e dire ah, beh,
This
giochi a
combo
LOL, giochi
also
anche
works really
TFT.
well with incendiary rapid shot. I'm going to charge up the heat on my crossbow, shoot out a bunch of grenades, and then start the fireworks with a power shot.
Perché fai una roba del... Cioè, a che pro? Ha detto che tira la barrage, mette giù la granata e poi col power shot la attiva. Sì, no, bello da vedere, figa l'idea, ma ci hai messo 6 ore a tirare giù un gruppo di mostri bianchi.
This is great for crowd controlling monsters in tight passages.
Ok, c'è il Frost Wall fatto a mo' di granata
They get
anziché
destroyed by monsters, then they will explode, doing a small amount of damage.
a mo' di... Non lo so, è una skill, è Frost Wall. Solo che la spari con la crossbow anziché metterla giù da sotto. Non è nulla di diverso, eh.
Now, remember that burst shot
me la
combo with
metti?
frozen enemies we did earlier? That works with ice walls too. Let's put burst shot back on.
Cos'è che fa questo qui, Frozen Enemy?
Now I can fill up this area with ice walls, then shoot them with armor-piercing burst shot for a huge amount of damage.
Sì, ok. Cioè, è un gioco che si basa sull'avere 2 o 3 meccaniche che si combinano tra di loro, fanno sinergia e fa un sacco di male. Va bene. Però c'è sono mostri blu, raga.
Alright, it's time to face the boss for this area.
Non
Let's
mi
see how
fermerò
fair it is to
mai.
all the skills I've shown you so far.
In POE almeno non mi fermano mai. Adesso c'è il boss, figata. I boss sono fatti bene, cazzo. Ma che bello con le forbici. Adesso fa vedere tutte le meccaniche unite insieme. Gli blocca, cioè lo manda in armor pierce. Poi gli spara con quello grosso. Poi gli tira la cosa infuocata. Ci sta. Rapid fire! È carino che il tuo personaggio ti dice quello che fai, questa è una bella cosa. Chissà se lo fa solo il mercenario o se tutti hanno queste voice line codificate. Minchia che bello sto boss però. Lui non sta doggiando ma neanche per le balle. Però è figo, cioè si vede che questo è un giocatore di POE. Non gli viene neanche in mente di doggiare. Chissà le movement skill come saranno. Vedi, non è che dice adesso gli è venuto in mente che poteva doggiare. Non usa quelle del ghiaccio. Chissà perché non le usa, probabilmente non funzionano contro il boss. Ok, si è ricordato di doggiare. Adesso io non intendo. Beh, chiaramente c'è anche loro. Nel senso non credo che sia tanta la gente che gioca a POE 2 dalla mattina alla sera. La maggior parte è gente che gioca a POE 1. C'è un cazzo di vita, contando che ha 3 fiasche piene. Un po' di vita se la potrebbe srossire. Bello il finale.
And that's the mercenary. It feels totally different than anything we've made before, and shows you the range of what's possible in Path of Exile 2.
Non lo so, io su queste cose stilistiche non sono proprio uno molto concentrato sul gameplay. Quindi se il gameplay è figo, ok. Cioè se il gameplay è del mio gusto, ok, se no non...
We're going to be showing off a lot more about Path of Exile 2 as we approach its
Non ha
beta,
troppo senso.
but in the meantime, we've got a Path of Exile 1 expansion coming out next week. I'm going to hand over to Mark, also known as Neon, to show you what's in
Io
store.
dovrei aver preso le ali.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, let's just go ahead and get straight on into it. Here's the trailer for Path of Exile Affliction.
Oh, dai cazzo.
Something moves in the mists. Something sinister.
Ragazzi, gasatissimo.
Thorn. Rot.
Non è nelle mappe questo, è una cosa
And
fuori dalle mappe.
claw. The affliction spreads. It hungers for more.
Cazzo è?
Tread lightly in the wildwood, which shifts and bites. Accept our help, the ancient power of the Asmiri. Beware the spirits that yearn for freedom.
Hanno cambiato l'ascendancy, ci sono nuove ascendancy.
And the
Raga,
heart of evil that waits in the dark.
Madonna! Questo me l'avevano detto, cazzo. Sono gasato ma lo sapevo. Madonna, sì, ho capito che ho finito di vivere, raga. Niente, è stato bello. È stato un piacere fare queste 2 settimane in cui avevo una vita al di fuori di Wraeclast.
In the Affliction League, you will encounter sacred wisps, which beckon you to enter overgrown passageways that lead to the Viridian Wildwood. A vile affliction has covered this forest with a foreboding darkness. You'll need to uncover the forest mysteries to put a stop to the source of the affliction. As you approach the darkness, the wisps burn away its affliction. Make sure you tread carefully, because they only have a limited amount of power. But be warned, the darkness is full of cursed monsters that emerge to kill you.
Figo.
As you explore, you might see other types of wisps trapped inside the darkness. The Wildwood is trying to guide you towards clues about its affliction. Follow the trails of wisps by collecting them, and you may uncover many different secrets. New characters to find, shrines, boss battles, and all kinds of new encounters are lurking in the forest just waiting for you to discover them. There are many rewards to earn for those brave enough to seek them.
Stanno usando l'Acerite. Spero che riworkino Bleed.
When the sacred wisps run out of energy, they will return you back to where you came from. Any other types of wisps you have collected will return with you to Wraeclast.
Ah, perché collezione Wisp. Ok.
These wisps, having been saved from the affliction, disperse into the environment and inhabit randomly chosen monsters in the area, increasing their power and also their rewards.
Madonna.
The different types of wisps have different effects on monsters, and sometimes more than one type will inhabit a single monster, making the fight even harder and even
Madonna.
If this happens to a boss, you could be in for a tough fight.
Sono le nuove
If you can
Sentinel.
overcome it, your efforts will not be in vain. Primal wisps grant an item rarity bonus to inhabited monsters. Wild wisps grant an item quantity bonus, and vivid wisps cause them to drop currency items. If a monster gets all 3 types, they'll drop more items of a higher rarity and a lot of currency.
Vabbè, raga.
While exploring the Wildwood, you might find some of the last few Asmeri wanderers who have managed to survive in the forest since it was cursed. Each of them have different survival specializations, and they are willing to teach you if you agree to help them defeat the source of the affliction, the King in the
Minchia, aiuto
Mists.
subito. Subito.
Choose which of the Asmeri that you will complete quests for to unlock one of 3 new Ascendancy classes, which you can have in addition to your regular Ascendancy class. Up to 8 points for these classes are unlocked as you complete more quests for the Commander. The Warden of Eves can teach you to become a Warden of the Magi, a powerful class that takes advantage of wilderness knowledge. A Warden of the Magi can learn to use tinctures which coat their weapon, granting various powerful effects. You can equip tinctures in your flask slots and toggle them on and off at will. You can only have one enabled at a time,
Figata la
but the
tincture.
effects are quite conditional, so you may want to have more than one equipped and swap between them during combat.
Minchia.
For example, equip the Ironwood Tincture to gain the benefit of always stunning enemies on full life. Tinctures can also get random mods. This one in particular adds stacks of wither to targets on full life and steals frenzy charges on hit, which makes it great as an initiator. When you are fighting rare monsters or finishing off tough bosses, you will want to swap to the Oak Branch Tincture, which grants Culling Strike, increased damage against enemies on low life, and has a chance to steal a mod from rare
E
enemies.
la
to kill.
Madonna.
You can buy more tinctures from the Warden of Eves using Primal Wisps when you find her in the forest, so keep an eye out for her.
Unmodifiable, ok.
As a Warden of the Magi gains more Ascendancy points, they gain access to more skills that let them further specialize in tinctures. For example, Nature's Concoction allows you to invest in having your tinctures enhance your flasks. This Ascendancy skill makes it important to think about which slots your tinctures are placed in, and what flasks they are adjacent to. You will have better uptime on those flasks and they'll be stronger as a result. But there are plenty more skills to choose even if you don't want to engage with tinctures. For example, another new ability to unlock is Barkskin.
Barkskin è tipo una difesa.
It's a reservation skill that causes bark to grow all over your body, increasing armor. As you take damage, the bark falls off, increasing your evasion. Over time, the bark will grow back, removing the evasion bonus but increasing your armor
Se
again.
faccio l'armor stacker questo è perfetto.
The Breaker of Oaths can teach you to become a Warlock of the Mists, an ascendancy class specializing in the darker arts of the Izmiri. One powerful ability you can choose is Blood Hunt, which grants an active skill called Ravenous. This skill lets you see what type a monster is under its life bar, whether it is a demon, beast, undead, construct, or humanoid.
Ok.
Consuming a corpse with this skill gives a buff to damage against that type of monster, and reduces damage taken by it. You can only have one type active at a time, so it's a good idea to choose wisely for the area that you are in. Some bosses, like the Maven, are eldritch in nature and don't conform to the regular corpses that you have access to. But don't worry. The Breaker of Oaths has a shop where you can trade wild wisps for corpses that you can place on the ground wherever you are.
Oh!
Buy an eldritch corpse and you will be able to get the bonus while fighting eldritch entities like the Maven. You may notice that most of the corpses he sells are not monsters you normally encounter.
Puoi farli diventare spettri?
You might want to try turning some of these corpses into specters, to take advantage of some of the unique abilities that these monsters have.
Minchia. La madonna, cos'è l'idra questa?
The Warlock of the Mists gets access to many other abilities. For example, there is a trio of curses that you can pick from. One of these curses targets your minions, giving them life degen and making them explode for massive damage when they are near death. One of them prevents enemies from dealing damage for the latter portion of its duration, which is quite powerful against bosses. This curse creates the interesting build decision of whether or not you should increase curse duration or reduce it. The final curse is a mark that causes enemy phantasms to be spawned when you hit the marked enemy. These phantasms aren't on your side, so they work well with on-hit and on-kill trigger effects, for example. The Primal Huntress can teach you to become a Wildwood Primalist.
Non ho capito.
Unlike the other new ascendancies, the Primal Huntress lets you customize your tree. You do this with charms that you can buy from the Primal Huntress for Vivid Wisps. Charms have randomly generated mods, which give stats from regular ascendancy classes, allowing you to create your own hybrid ascendancy class.
Cioè, immagina un Sion con
Charms
sta
are
roba.
magic items that are aligned with different attributes. So for example, this Ursine charm is strength aligned, and has gotten the melee hits have a chance to fortify stat from the champion, and the ability to stop your movement speed going below base from the Juggernaut. This interline Corvine charm lets you get the stat that makes your consecrated ground effects linger from the Inquisitor, and the effect that makes cursed enemies explode from the Occultist. Some of the combination of mods that you might find for sale on charms can be extremely powerful, so keep a lookout for the Primal Huntress's shop even if you are not playing as a Primalist. As a Primalist, you also get access to a few other interesting abilities. Use Warcries next to corpses and they have a chance to drop an extra item. It opens nearby chests too. The Primalist also gets access to a small extra backpack, just in case you find yourself needing to cart more items to town during your map runs. If you are unhappy with the class you picked, or you just happen to find a really great item for another one of the classes, you are able to change which class you are using next time you find one of the Izmiri Wanderers. Just remember that you will have to do their quests in order to gain the ascendancy points for that class. These quests will lead you towards the ultimate goal of the Izmiri, finding the King in the Mists, defeating him, and cleansing the forest of its affliction once and for all. There are new uniques to find, rewards to claim, and new ascendancy classes to master in the Affliction League. Now that we...
Minchia, raga. Cioè, vogliamo parlarne? Hanno unito Lake of Calandra, Sentinel, l'altra, quella del coso sulle armi, come cazzo si chiama? Forge of the Titan, era a 3.21, in una lega sola, e l'hanno fatta fighissima. L'hanno fatta fighissima. Madonna. Cioè, niente, io ho finito di vivere. Lo so già. Lo so già. Adesso ho paura di vedere che cosa hanno cambiato nel gioco, ma è stato bello, è stato bello. stavo guarendo finalmente, avevo ricominciato a dormire e niente, il lavoro lo stavo riportando al punto giusto. Mi fa male la gola, ma a parte quello, tutto a posto, vediamo come va. Cazzo. È troppo figa sta roba, cioè mi dai delle... Tu mi dai un Scion che può prendere delle passive più... Cioè, mi dai il Scion vero. Praticamente l'Antres è quello che ogni Scion sogna di avere. Cioè, non quelle passive sfigate lì, ma tutta... Fammi scegliere. Fammi scegliere le passive. Sapete che questo... Non lo so, adesso sto parlando a caso, ma potrebbe essere la prima lega in cui starto non Sion, perché con l'Antres lì mi permette di fare il Sion con un altro personaggio, quindi magari potrei startare con un... come si chiama il ladro, quello figo? Eh, il Trickster. Potrei fare un Trickster e farlo diventare un... non lo so ancora, ma è una roba fighissima.
We've covered what's in the league. Let's talk about some of the changes you can expect to the core game in 323. For a start, Ultimatum is finally going core. When talking to players at ExileCon, it was the #1 feature that people requested. When playing through in-game maps, you may sometimes encounter the Trial Master, who offers you a choice to undertake a deadly Val trial in exchange for great rewards.
Ok.
If you defeat the trial, he offers to go double or nothing with you. Do you take the risk and go
E
for an even
quello,
better reward,
va bene.
or do you take the winnings you have already earned off the table?
Non me la ricordo, come mi ricordo che
We've
la
done a full
Cloud non
rebalance
serviva a
of
niente, era
Ultimatum
tanto
and
di
have added
muovere.
many new mods and rewards, including both new and reworked uniques. The base number of rounds for an Ultimatum
Madonna,
trial
aspetta, quanti cazzo di modificatori c'ha questo? Porco giù, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Che cazzo è? Questo cosa fa quando sei colpito? Ti cambia la velocità.
is now always 10, with a chance to spawn the Trial Master boss fight on the 10th round, if you are able to make it that far. As part of 323, we have also removed Metamorph from the game. All the Catalyst rewards from Metamorph have now been moved to be rewards for Ultimatum. We have
Aspetta, hanno tolto Metamorph? Il mio stash? Mi va in ultimato?
also added
No,
a new
stash
Val-themed catalyst that works on corrupted items. As is normal for most content that gets added to in-game, we have introduced new Ultimatum passive skills to the Atlas tree.
Non lo faceva proprio nessuno Metamorph. A me non dispiaceva Metamorph, cioè... A me non dispiaceva. Cavacca, almeno con lo Rogmi. L'ho usato tutta la scorsa lega. Si vede che ero uno dei pochi. Porca vacca, i Catalyst adesso te li dà Ultimatum. Chissà se te li dà ancora anche Blight, anche... Penso di sì.
One great example is the Keystone Grueling Gauntlet. It makes ultimatums last 3 extra rounds, but you cannot choose the modifiers, and it prevents the final Trial Master boss fight from spawning. The level of challenge becomes extreme during the last 3 rounds, and not being able to choose the modifiers makes it even harder. But the rewards are insane, and for those with very high-end characters, it might be a bet worth making. There are lots of other Atlas passive skills you can pick from for Ultimatum, so choose wisely.
Now, it's time to talk about one of the largest metagame changes we've ever made. There were 3 systems in Path of Exile that were all trying to subtly modify the behavior of skills. These were alternate quality gems, Labyrinth Helmet Enchants, and unique Threshold
Mi
Jewels.
cambi il labirinto?
We've combined all of these together to create a new system called Transfigured Gems that allows us to fully achieve the goal of these 3 systems and then some.
What?
Transfigured gems are alternative versions of existing skill gems that have different functionality and balance from their regular versions. We have added a huge number of these with interesting
Scusate, voglio riscoltarla perché non ho capito esattamente cosa faceva, ma io farò Ultimatum questa Legacy. Non faccio Sanctum, non faccio Ice.
One of the largest metagame changes we've ever made. There were 3 systems in Path of Exile that were all trying to subtly modify the behavior of skills. These were alternate quality gems, Labyrinth Helmet Enchants, and unique Threshold Jewels. We've combined all of these together to create a new system called...
Cosa sono i Threshold Jewels? Non lo so.
called transfigured gems that allow
Ah, sì, sono quelli tipo quello che fa diventare gli scheletri maghi. Sanno scheletri maghi, penso.
us to fully achieve the goal of these three systems and then some.
Transfigured gems are alternative versions of existing skill gems that have different functionality and balance from their regular versions. We have added a huge number of these with interesting variations that drastically change how existing skills play. For example,
Se hanno tolto i lab enchant, io sono felicissimo perché questa per me era una delle cose più tediose da dover fare. Il fatto di dire magari per certe skill ti serve il lab enchant, che perché ti dà veramente tantissimo potere e non aveva il minimo senso. Cioè magari dovevi pagare 15 divine a qualcuno, dargli il tuo elmo per 2 giorni,
example, Frostbomb of Instability. It changes it from a cooldown skill that you can cast occasionally for a large explosion into a skill that you can cast continuously but deals less damage and doesn't apply cold exposure.
Ok.
It changes the role of Frostbomb from a utility skill into a main damaging skill. Another example is Detonate Dead of Scavenging. You can't use it on corpses that were created by Desecrate or Unearth, but in exchange it does a whole lot more damage. You won't be able to use it as your main reliable source of damage, but it's a
Però
great
sono
skill to
divise
use
da
with
quelle
falling
normali
utility
queste.
to get some extreme burst damage. Raise Zombie of Falling. Instead of raising a zombie from a corpse, you summon them from mid-air. They fall to their death, dealing AoE damage where they land. While this sounds like a physical damage version of Firestorm, you should consider that it scales with minion damage and also triggers on-death minion effects. Blight of Contagion. This version of Blight is now spread by Contagion, so you can use it as part of your Essence Drain build. We have a huge number of these. Transfigure Firestorm into Firestorm with Meteors, transfigure Blade Trap into Blade Trap of Great Swords, transfigure Barrage into Barrage of Volley Fire, and so on. There is a lot to experiment with, and we look forward to seeing what builds you can come up with. But how do you get transfigured gems? The Divine Font at the end of the Eternal Labyrinth has been changed to a gem crafting device that can modify your skill and support gems in a lot of new ways. One of the options you can now choose is to turn a skill gem into one of 3 transfigured gems. But that isn't all the Divine Font can do. It has a lot of other gem crafting options you can use. For example, you can add quality to gems, add experience to gems, sacrifice a gem for 1 or more treasure keys to open Azaro's chests, and you can even exchange support gems for exceptional support gems like Empower or Enlighten. These are just some of the options you'll find the Divine Font is now capable of.
Whoa.
In order to replace the rewards in Heist that previously gave alternate quality gems, we have done a rebalance of the rewards of Heist as well. Experimented base types have been rebalanced, new replica uniques have been added and old ones changed, and we have increased the amount of currency from display cases as well.
Ok, io non ho deciso se startare questa lega facendo Heist o facendo Sanctum. Mi toglie i blueprint più fighi, che sono quelli della replica. Mi metti Ultimatum. Io faccio o il Lab Runner. Ultimatum Runner sarebbe più figo.
On top of this, we have gone through and buffed the quality stats on most damage dealing skills. In most cases, they will be significantly more powerful than before, and also more interesting. Overall, this we have got. Experimented base types have been rebalanced, new replica uniques have been added and old ones changed, and we have increased the amount of currency from display cases as well.
Ok.
On top of this, we have gone through and buffed the quality stats on most damage dealing skills. In most cases, they will be significantly more powerful than before, and also more interesting. Overall, this is one of the largest metagame shifts that we've ever done. There are so many crazy new skill combinations to plan around, so we expect to see some really interesting new builds. Next up, I'd like to hand back over to Chris to talk about the new supporter packs.
Minchia, ma che figata è sta
At this
roba.
point, we'd usually talk about the League
Oh!
supporter
Sono
packs.
già casato.
We're doing things a bit differently this year. Rather than releasing League supporter packs today and then our annual core packs 2 weeks later, we've combined it all together into a strong set of core supporter
Scusate,
packs
fatemi
that
capire un
will be
attimo
released
questa roba.
alongside Path of Exile.
Lo faccio di là perché non voglio che si veda. Io dovrei avere i Twitch Drops. Questo qua è uno scammone pazzesco. Raga, attenzione a sta roba. C'è sta gente che ti manda... Ah, cavolo. C'è sta gente che ti manda i messaggi con i drop. e ti manda su un sito in cui ti fanno connettere l'account. Non fatelo, non fatelo, perché i drop te li fa vedere qua, guarda. Sono eleggibile per i drop, fammi vedere se non ci sono dati vari. Non ci sono dati vari. Mi dice siete eleggibili, faccio climb ora, pam, presi, c'ho i dropponi. Quindi easy peasy. Da qua fatelo, raga, da qua. Non prendete messaggi in chat perché poi non dite che non vi ho avvisati.
Exile Affliction next week. The series contains 5 packs, each with its full value in points and a collection of exclusive cosmetic microtransactions. The higher packs contain physical merchandise. We'll unveil the full details of each of the packs at release next week, but in the meantime, here's a sneak peek of some of their exclusive cosmetic microtransactions. These packs will be available for purchase when part of
Aspetta, me li voglio riguardare perché gli ultimi che hanno fatto non mi casavano per niente. Ma per niente proprio. Allora,
The series in our annual core packs 2 weeks later. We have combined it all together into a strong set of core supporter packs that will be released alongside Path.
fammi capire
Back
cosa.
over to Chris to talk about the new
Ok,
support
allora
packs.
ascoltiamo che.
At this point, we'd usually talk about the League supporter packs. We're doing things a bit differently this year. Rather than releasing League supporter packs today and then our annual core packs 2 weeks later, we have combined it all together into a strong set of core supporter packs that will be released alongside Path of Exile Affliction next week.
Oh, che hanno fatto una cosa bella, intelligente. Anziché mettere quelli della Lega, 3 supporter pack della Lega, cioè i 2 della Lega, con le 3 versioni adesso, e tra 2 settimane quelli dell'anno, li mettono tutti insieme, così uno vede, dice, ah, mi piacciono più questi, mi piacciono più quelli, sceglie quale prendere. Ci sta, perché sennò uno dice, beh, aspetto 2 settimane a prenderli, poi magari smette di giocare e si inculano anche loro.
The series contains 5 packs, each with its full value in points and a collection of exclusive cosmetic microtransactions. The higher packs contain physical merchandise. We'll unveil the full details of each of the packs at release next week,
Queste
but
sono
in the
proprietà
meantime,
marrate
here's a
che
sneak peek of some of their exclusive cosmetic
vanno più che
microtransactions.
valgono.
These packs will be available for purchase when Path of Exile Affliction launches
Questo
on the 8th
cos'è?
of
Questo è
December.
una figata.
Thank you so much for your ongoing support.
E la madonna.
We're just about to start the Q&A with Ziggy D.
Non me l'aspettavo
Afterwards, we'll post
questo.
Path of Exile Affliction's full patch notes. With the release at the end of next week, our community
Quello
team
con
will be posting
l'indicatore di dove è
crucial
il boss è una
information
figata
you need for
pazzesca.
Affliction's release. Keep an eye on the news. On release weekend, we expect to launch the new
Senza il
mystery
prof
box and
vince
this
quando si
season's
nasconde.
Kyrix Vault
Vedi.
Glass. Thanks for joining us today and checking out our latest developments. We're looking
Andiamo a
forward
vedere
to
Ziggy che
exploring
domande
the
gli
origin
fa.
of Wildwood with you next week. We'll begin the Q&A shortly, so please get your questions
raga,
ready.
3.23, cioè rendetevi conto, 3.23 è da paura, da paura. Controlliamo se ho preso i droppi. Oh, li ho presi i droppi, perfetto. Claimo, perché sto prendendo anche col secondo account, giustamente dico, perché devo prenderli con un account solo, non posso prenderli con 2. Sono i drop. Che cavolo, aspetta, scusate, che mi sono perso un attimo.
G'day, Ziggy D here, folks.
Buono,
Exiles,
partiamo.
welcome for a giant jam-packed Q&A after a huge reveal session. We have here today Chris, Jonathan, and Mark.
È arrivato un
3
messaggio a
Price
me
of One
o a
this time
loro?
around, not just Chris. Welcome, folks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Excellent, folks. We're going to be moving through things in rough order that we saw things today during the reveal. So starting with Path of Exile 2 and then moving through some of the new Path of Exile 1 features. So get those
Non
questions
stanno
in
scrivendo a me,
through
ok.
Twitch chat, and we'll sprinkle those in through each of those
Anche
various
perché ho Discord
sections. So
chiuso.
first, let's talk about that new movement scheme that was revealed with the new mercenary class. So we have the new WASD movement. And does this alternate control scheme work with other classes and builds, or is it mainly intended for like this shooter mercenary style?
So when we put it in, I was totally thinking that it was going to be something that you'd want to use with ranged characters way more. But actually, when I tried out some melee
cosa
stuff,
del
I was
VSAD
pretty sold on
è
it actually. It was better than I was expecting.
in
There's still a few
particolare.
tweaks to do to make that perfect internally, but like yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I think I'm probably I think I'm going to be playing that way myself actually, even though I was a bit of a skeptic at first of WASD for melee. I think it is good, but we want to make sure that everyone understands that you can change from one to the other whenever you want. It's just one of those things that yeah, like some people may prefer it, some people may not. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it. WASD rather feels pretty good to me.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, to be honest. Like, I've, die-hard action RPG, Diablo 2 era kind of guy myself. But for some reason, the WSD stuff just feels really natural to play, I guess.
Sto parlando di muoversi con
Land and that kind of thing.
WSAD.
That first time you use it, it's a little bit jarring because W is now not a skill, but once you can get beyond that, it is like very, very fun to play.
It is actually funny going I went loaded up the POE 1 client again recently, and like I was immediately using WSD, like, oh shit.
Yeah. Dude, keep doing
Beh, c'è da dire che l'inventory management potrebbe essere molto più comodo muovendosi con
So
VSAD.
I had that same problem. I was going to ask then, can WASD movement be added to Path of Exile 1, or is it exclusively a PoE 2 feature?
It's probably going to be pretty hard to add it to PoE 1, and the reason would be because the number of animations you need to support like arbitrary directional movement like that is really high, and the rigs in PoE 1 are so old that it would be really, really difficult to add. So I think it's probably like quite unlikely. And just in general, the animation stuff that we're doing in PoE 2, like it's just a different level. So it was like okay, I'm not going to say easy, but it was easier to add it in PoE 2 than it
Sta dicendo che VSAD probabilmente in PoE 1
now I'd say it's going to be
che potrebbe essere carino. Immagina fare la campagna
How have
intanto
you
che fai
found hotkey
inventory
usage and things
management
like that while moving
e ti
around
muovi con
using WASD
VSAD.
movement?
So basically now it's just a different level. So it was like okay, I'm not going to say easy, but it was easier to add it in PoE 2 than it would have been in PoE 1 by far. So yeah, for now I'd say
Devo stare
it's going
zitto,
to be PoE 2
ascoltare un
only.
attimo, se no non capisco cosa dice.
How have you found hotkey usage and things like that while moving around with WSD movement?
So basically,
Sta chiedendo degli
one
altri
thing it does
tasti per le
is, like, so
skill.
it's definitely a thing.
Le cose di
But
più di
what
non
uses
mi
what I found out is
interessano.
you
Voglio
basically
sapere
on
di
the click
Affliction.
three
Sono
buttons,
casatissimo io per
to
Affliction.
put a skill on. So you've kind of got like sort of you can have like sort of three major skills on mouse, and then having
Non
other
mi
stuff on
interessa
keyboard,
che
and
tasti
it's
come li hai
pretty
messi,
stuff
come
that I
fai le
personally
cose.
released
Dimmi
used to
com'è
be
la
sort of more really
323.
stuff that used to be pretty commonly used, but still a bit rarer. And so it wasn't too bad. I found it okay. It is a concern
Madonna.
for sure. Like,
Jonathan,
that, like,
qua mi sta continuando a parlare di PoE 2, io voglio sentire la
harder to do
323.
that way, but
Qui
in
Jonathan,
the scheme of things, it's
Madonna.
working really well for what we were doing there.
And how well does this translate to controllers then? You would think it'd be
Ma sì,
better
andrà
for
bene di sicuro sul controller,
It is,
dai,
we
su.
have also implemented so that
Siamo
the
a
right stick you
323.
use to aim which direction you
Madonna,
go in on a
Madonna.
controller, and it does work well there. There's like a bunch of
Dai
other
che sono
cool stuff that I'm
gasatissimo,
fiddling around with
porco
to make
Giuda,
that
mi hai
better.
fatto
But yeah,
un intro
definitely does help
stupenda, mi hai
in
fatto
that
vedere
way
il
as well.
mondo, mi hai
This
fatto
is just
vedere una
kind of it's
meccanica
movement. It's
che
actually stuff that
senti nel calandra,
use the
l'altro del,
utilize the fact that we've got
non
the
dell'ancestor,
ability
come
for the
si
character to
chiama,
face a different way than they're walking.
dei
That actually
titani,
there's
della
some
forgia dei
cases where you can
titani,
make
in un colpo
WSD
solo, me ne hai
work
messi
like that as
insieme,
well.
mi dai le
So
ascendancy nelle
it's
ascendancy
kind of minor stuff, but like
e mi
the
parli
animation
se
does look actually better with
VSAD funziona col
And
controller.
what sort of skills can you use while moving? That was mentioned that some will be kind of like functional in that way.
Yeah, so we're still like going through and thinking exactly what we want to do there. But the basic thing is that you definitely want to have, I think, for each build, a few skills that you can use in that way, because it does make combat feel faster when you can kind of be doing stuff on the way to the next monster, this kind of thing. It just kind of improves it.
Dai,
in a
che
way
tra
that,
poco
once you
arriveremo alle
explain it
domande sulla
as well, that's
323.
actually
Adesso gli sta
cool.
chiedendo le skill che puoi
Yeah,
usare
it
quando
won't
si
be like
muove, quali
everything. Like,
sono.
a
Lui
lot of
dice
the
non lo
kind of
sappiamo
things that we're
ancora, ne
doing is
abbiamo in mente un paio.
getting the
Frega!
we can
Chi
shorten
se
the
ne
window. We have
frega?
this ability now. We can kind of shorten the windows
PoE 1,
where you're not allowed to move, where people are locked
3.23.
out in skills as well. So like
Voglio vedere come
one
finiranno i miei
contact
giorni.
point, you actually have to stop, and then for other skills
Io
you
lo
can
so
do it
già,
completely
so
while
già
you're
che mi
moving.
sveglierò la
So like
mattina.
some of the
Mi attaccherò PoE prima ancora di far colazione perché devo vedere se il trade
so I'm not
sta
going to like give you a list
andando.
or anything, but yeah,
E
we
faccio
definitely
una
want to make
mappa
sure
così
that you've got
perché
as skills that you can do while moving available, so that
e la
you
mia
can
vita
kind of
finirà
minimize the
così,
time when moving
tra
between
una
packs.
mappa e un
Skills
santo.
that incorporate more movement or even play with the lack of
should be
movement, like
used
planting your feet.
Comunque mi gira le...
What's that, sorry?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I think Discord kind of lagged out for a second there.
Oh, okay. But yeah, the other thing as well is that is another question people have asked is like how does it work when you are using click to move? And the answer is honestly pretty simple. Like, you click where you want to move, and then you move the mouse and use the skill in the other direction, and then your character will just not be interrupted the move. They'll just keep moving while you shoot in the other direction. That
È
does
ovvio,
work. Like,
cioè,
it is technically, like, I mean, it takes a bit more
non lo so.
mouse movement to be able to do it if you want to move while you're doing it, but it does work. So there's no technical disadvantage there other than just,
Non lo so,
I mean,
è
effectively what you're doing is
noiosissima
like,
sta roba.
it's
Non me ne
like
frega niente di
same
POE
exact
2, non me
motion,
ne
you're
frega
doing it at the same
niente. Fatevene
except that, like,
separati la
you
prossima
move at the same
volta.
time while you're doing it, basically.
Yeah, you effectively
No,
like
vanno
queue
bene
up a
metterli
move
insieme.
command and then fire in the
Exactly.
opposite direction or something.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you
Lower
find that this
APM.
is what's that?
I was saying it's like lower APM stutter stepping.
Do you find that this is like opening up a lot new design space for you with skills then? Because this is like a new way of thinking
Ma chi se ne
that they haven't really had
frega.
access to in terms of skill design now.
For sure, there's definitely a lot of stuff. Like, we haven't even really yet explored all the repercussions on other builds as much as we would like to yet. Like, there's a lot of stuff to change here and kind of get and utilize that stuff for. But yeah, as I said, once we tried it, it's just like, yeah, we need to be exploring this all throughout what we're doing and making sure that we can take advantage of it so it feels as natural as possible when you've got like direct character control like that.
What we're finding here is the overarching goal with the new characters in Path of Exile 2 is that each one plays entirely differently. We're releasing 12 games in one, where you can play an entirely different style with each character and feel compelled now that you've tried
Stanno
most
proprio
of them,
facendo in modo che ogni personaggio sia diverso, quindi stanno togliendo sta cosa che è la mia cosa preferita di POE 1, che
WSD controls
chiunque può fare chiunque, qualsiasi cosa.
is the canonical WSD control one because of the crossbow stuff feeling like a gun. And then the fallout from that, of course, is then it benefits all the other 11 classes and millions of different playstyles, and that kind of falls through afterwards, and we get time to experiment with how it actually works on those classes.
Yeah, at the risk of going like off topic a little bit, I already noticed in previous reveals that like the melee stuff is getting a lot more fluid with a lot more movement and stuff like that. But a lot of that was a kind of pre-scripted but modifiable movement.
Io ci provo a farmelo piacere sto POE 2, ma
like that. But it seems like now even you might even be able to have things like where your character's able to do a cleave while taking a couple extra steps, just little things like that. So it seems like it's going to change gameplay a lot from Path of Exile 1 to 2.
I think it can, but we do have to be careful. Like, I don't want the feeling of just complete floatiness. Like, we don't want, like, I wouldn't
tanto
want
che per quello io provo a avviare POE
while moving
a vedere se
to still feel like
mi ha preso le
there's
ali.
at least some amount of the animation where you're kind of like locked into that little bit. So for something like cleave, for example, what I do is you can kind of step into it
Non mi
move really
convince.
quickly after the slash, but the actual slash itself, you need a bit of that sort of like locked in just so that you got something going on there, because otherwise
Ho
it'll just
proprio
feel
paura
like
che
you're kind
POE
of
2 non mi
just
piacerà.
like floating around, kind of not really doing anything. So that's a little bit vague, but effectively, I just want to avoid the kind of feeling where where you don't feel like you're a real character in the world, which you.
È la mia
get
grande
when you just allow full
preoccupazione.
unrestricted. Like, if you do absolutely everything while moving and there was no slowdowns or anything, it would feel real floaty, and I don't like that either. So it can be a little bit of an interesting one. You have to really look at the feel of every single skill and kind of get the timing windows exactly right for everything to be able to make it actually feel really solid and good. Yeah, if we're doing our job right, then every class should have quite a distinct feel as far as all that stuff goes.
Like, I get what you mean. Like, once you have more movement, that's when you can start playing with, like, okay, in what situations do we stop movement? Like, I noticed with the crossbow, for example, the character planted their feet for the shotgun shots especially, and that made that look and feel a lot more impactful. So
Vedi,
that's
come non ci date le ali però.
Exactly.
Tra l'altro no, quindi ho sbagliato account, credo.
It seems they've changed quite a bit since the original reveal with the armor piercing bolts and whatnot.
Devo creare un account di Twitch per poterlo collegare allo Smurf di POE.
Absolutely. I mean, so the split to all of the classes happened after that the last reveal, and so then we were kind of like, we need to make sure that we're making like I didn't. Even like there were like the mechanical ideas of like having ammos and stuff like that for the crossbows before, but I don't think we'd quite yet nailed the kind of like, how is a crossbow actually going to feel really different to play than a bow. And it wasn't until I sort of made the observation that, hey, like,
non lo so, forse a giocare sta crossbow è una
if you pull the
figata,
trigger
però
on a crossbow,
cioè,
it
guarda
needs to fire instantly. We should be putting the contact point literally at 0 on the animation. So this is a bit of a technical term. Like, contact point just means point where the damage happens, etc., etc.
Questa potrebbe essere la lega in cui Starton non
do
si
that, like, what kind of things would need to change. And we actually found there was like a grab bag. Like, as soon as we did that, there's like a grab bag of issues that we.
Oppure faccio il Scion,
But on top of it,
faccio
it's like
l'armor
the amount of
stacker
engine brokenness that the mercenary
e
brought to
spacco
it
tutto con un armor
brought to the
stacker
front was so high.
Adesso faccio la
Like, the amount
copertina,
of things like,
ovviamente.
that we had to fix in order to make the mercenary work in the engine was just ridiculous.
Che
Like,
palle,
I found
raga.
so many bugs. I mean, these are all going to be fixed,
Che
by the way.
palle, ma gli chiedi le
Once we're
cose da
obviously in the engine shit.
323?
But it's like, I found out that projectiles like disappear a frame before they arrive at the destination, and they appear one frame late after they leave your character as well. And that it turns out all objects when they're created appear 33 milliseconds late from when they actually render. And like there was stuff with trail. I mean, like it was just
Sta
actually
gasatissimo a parlare che i proiettili spariscono un frame prima di colpire e appaiono un frame dopo essere sparati.
Instantly as soon as you click, and like all these things, there was like so many engine things where it's like we're speeding all this shit up, and like the engines just started breaking.
Bello, lui è casato perché
there was a lot of technical improvements that had to happen in order to make that make that stuff work. Not to even mention the whole like WSD and all the animation system stuff, and yeah, like it was pretty crazy. So I'm really glad to remove a lot of jank that existed that we hadn't noticed before because things weren't fast enough to see the
lui deve
problems.
essere veramente bravo a
There was a lot of like
programmare.
frame by framing it.
Il gioco sarà un giocone della Madonna.
Perfect and all sort of stuff going on, and yeah, it was really crazy during the development of this stuff.
I love how that pans out in terms of improvements.
Sure.
So
Sì che è gasatissimo il POE 2, io voglio
I
sapere il
noticed
POE
that
1.
they have the new like skill bound to the weapon thing where they fire differently. So you have your shotgun crossbow and you have your semi-automatic crossbow or whatever. Are we mostly going to be modifying those primary skills, or are there going to be other primary separate skills that, or just kind of more ammo types that modify the base skills?
So there's definitely going to be more ammo types. There will be other skills, but what we did to sort of solve, as it were, the crossbow, like having crossbow skills that aren't tied to the primary firing type.
Voglio vedere I balance changes.
And so those basically are
Voglio fare un lacerate.
that you equip them, where you'd equip a quiver instead. But they have support gems and everything like that. And effectively, whenever we want to have a crossbow skill, as it were, that isn't related to one of those primary firing types, then that'll be where that can go. And so there's way more than what we even showed there. Like we just showed like some grenades, but there's all sorts of other quirky types that have been come up with that you can attach to your crossbow. Like I know someone made like a bayonet at one point. I'm not sure how we're going to use that. But
POE 2 mi sta a parte che mancano 8 mesi a POE 2. Io con i panni per un'ora. Adesso che mancano 8 mesi. Tanto lo so già che ci giocherò io fra 8 mesi. Cioè,
what do you call them?
Fammi vedere la 323.
The crossbows that pop up when you summon
Ballista
totems. There's still ballista totems and other things like that, and like various other skills. So there's definitely other skills that we expect this class to use, but we kind of ran out of like time to be able to show like all the different things that you can do, and we'll show more of those later. But yeah, there's going to be other stuff that you can fill your skill slots with for sure. As well, so don't worry about that.
So are some bow skills going to become crossbow skills? Is there going to be shared across the two?
There are certainly some concepts that we might. I mean, look, when we're designing the classes, we're kind of like we do look at POE 1 and be like, is there anything here that we want to crib from, to kind of to use? And there might have been a couple of things that we've like sort of used as concepts, but overall, it is supposed to feel like this is distinct. And I'm sure maybe there'll be a time where like this is better suited as a crossbow skill than a bow skill. But in general, I guess like we're looking at designing things like this is a full new game. Like we're designing skills again. Like there will be cases where we go back and we're like, hey, this POE 1 skill is still great. Let's port it over. But in almost all cases, the skills get changed a lot. Like I mean, when you saw the sorceress, when we announced all the stuff there, it's like yeah, there were skills from POE 1, but like the changes to them were such that like they don't really feel the same at all. So it's they kind of end up quite different.
Yeah, I feel like I remember seeing like a melee skill became a spell or something like that. Some pretty big changes.
Weird stuff can happen,
yeah. So are the crossbows exclusive to the mercenary, or are they something anyone can use?
I mean, just like anything in POE, everyone can always use everything. I mean, we obviously, when we're showing stuff, we sort of show it as if like, this is a thing restricted to this class, something, but it isn't, of course. Like, you can use it anywhere. And one thing we definitely try to do is make sure that there are keywords that are usable between the classes to make sure, like, even if we don't know exactly how that'll be useful, like that they can lead to things that can be interesting. So, for example, on the
Quindi in POE 2 faranno ancora di più quello che stanno facendo adesso, che a me non piace. Nel senso, ti lasciano fare tutto a tutti. Però, se tu vuoi fare una cosa bene, cioè la cosa è bilanciata su una classe. Poi se tu sei straricco e sei straforte, puoi farla con altre classi. E questa cosa a me non piace. Tipo, ad esempio, in questa lega, questa qua che sta per finire, se tu vuoi fare roba poison, la fai col Pathfinder, perché il Pathfinder c'ha il 100% di more poison damage, mi sembra. Comunque, cioè, c'ha un... quello che fai col Pathfinder, con qualsiasi altra classe sei molto più debole a farlo. Infatti c'è solo Pathfinder in giro sta lega. E non mi piace che blocchi una... Mi piace tantissimo il Dead Eye. Il Dead Eye è specializzato negli archi. Ti dà qualcosa in più, ma non ti dà così tanto potere. Cioè, Dead Eye è una ascendancy debole. È forte, ma non ti dà così tanto potere. Che dici, o lo fai col Dead Eye o non lo fai. Non è come ad esempio, non lo so, l'Occultist che ha le esplosioni e quindi, vabbè, l'Occultist ha le esplosioni, però o lo fai con l'Occultist. Non lo fai, non è quello delle curses l'Occultist, è quello delle esplosioni. L'Elementalist è l'unico che converte le cose... No, beh, non è vero. Però a livello di Star sì. L'Inquisitor ti dà i critici gratis. Cioè, certe cose o le fai con l'Inquisitor o non le fai. Non ha senso. E a me queste cose non piacciono. Cioè, dovrebbe essere, se tu scegli la classe più adatta, puoi raggiungere il 20% di potere in più rispetto a uno che ne sta usando un'altra. Magari dalla più giusta alla più sbagliata puoi raddoppiare la qualità. Ma per le POE era proprio, quando ho iniziato a giocare io almeno, era proprio che cioè, tu potevi fare qualsiasi roba con qualsiasi classe. E la classe ti aiutava un pochino, perché ovviamente volevi fare Arc per dire, la facevi col Marauder, spendevi un fottio di punti per arrivare a prendere danno. E durante la campagna non avevi accesso a niente. Però era quello il problema. Adesso, secondo me, PoE 2 ancora di più probabilmente sarà così. Sarà che, cioè, tu puoi farlo con chiunque, ma se lo fai con quella classe funziona. Se lo fai con le altre, devi proprio inventarti fuori qualcosa di pittoresco per farlo.
Crossbow there, we had armor break being used, which is the same mechanic we were using on the warrior. And I mean, look, maybe in theory,
Cosa
saying
lì
something like
del
that
Dark
crossbow
Skin,
stuff is
ragazzi, se
still.
faccio l'Armor
I don't know how
Stacker,
that
quella
would work,
sarà la
but what I'm
mia.
saying is like by having the shared keywords across different classes, it just means that if someone wants to come up with something weird, you know, they can do that. So yeah, absolutely.
Quello può essere un boost della
I'm definitely
Madonna
going to
a
do that.
gratis.
I'm definitely going to do armor piercing bolt, crossbow, and then always crit. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean that's probably pretty broken actually as
Yes,
the balance
it
stands right now. I bet it's
is-
actually like real
yes,
broken.
it is right now.
Yeah.
With it seems like Discord died for the stream a little bit there. Sorry, Jonathan, what did you say? Mark, what did you say you were going to do?
Oh, it's using armor piercing bolts to get armor break from a distance, and then using sunder on which is a skill we showed on the warrior, because sunder gets always crit and higher crit damage
if the target's
target's armor broken. So when we showed the warrior, you have to use armor break, which is I guess
Sì,
kind of heavy
sì,
strike.
funziona
You know,
proprio
one
a
needs to break
skill
the
che
armor, but now
sinergizzano tra di
skills from a
loro
distance and then sunder from a
e
distance.
si scomba.
So yeah,
Cioè, può essere figa come cosa,
For
semplicemente
the
è un
weapons
gioco.
swapping and the tree swapping and stuff, I
yeah,
hope we see
it
some
works.
hybrid melee ranged. It's a
Yeah,
great
it can happen.
playstyle.
It can happen.
Especially for the mercenary, I feel it'd be a great fit. But moving on a little bit, we've got the oil grenade, and that effectively showed some environmental interactions, lighting a patch of oil on the ground on fire. Is that something you might expand to with other skills, enemy abilities, or even like combat areas? Like, here's an oil barrel.
Raga,
You
mi
can
viene
light
voglia
that
di
on fire or anything.
saltarlo. Voglio
Yeah,
passare
I
alle
mean, we absolutely
3:23.
love that stuff, like the environmental stuff. But I mean, even with the other skills we're designing, like I mean, things like the volcano
Continua a
interaction with
chiedergli roba
the
di
druid.
POE
That's
2.
another example of that kind
POE
of like
2
place
esce
a
fra
keyword and the
8
ability to do something with it.
mesi.
I quite like that
8,
stuff. I
faccio in
think
tempo a
it's
vedere
pretty
ancora
cool.
due,
So yeah, I absolutely want to
due
do more of that.
reveal
I mean,
prima di
and the
POE
more
2.
I guess state you can add to get a bit technical about
Cioè,
it to the world, where it's like, you know, placing a
cioè,
thing like, you know, like all that stuff allows you to do more
dai.
setting up for something you're going to do afterwards, which I think is a big part of being able to do combos and things like that. So yeah, like I'm a big fan of that kind of stuff.
We do have monsters integrating with that as well. Like we have, to give a couple examples, we have explosive barrels with lines of gunpowder, and the lines are randomly generated, and then you have monsters with torches that will run up and set them on fire.
Yeah.
And we've got another one as well that throws, it's like more of an alchemist monster, and it throws two types of, I guess, flasks or concoctions. and one creates ground type A and one creates ground type B, and if they mix, they end up creating a new type of ground type and exploding and doing massive AoE damage, like just chemical reactions.
Yeah.
It's coming up with a whole alchemy system for your
Yeah,
environmental
God.
interactions.
It's cool. We tried it in Heist. Surprise! I don't know if anyone even in POE 1 notices this, but there is oil there that does catch on fire. It just doesn't look anywhere near as good. Just because like where the art is and where the effects is now for POE 2 is just allowing things to look incredible.
Similarly, we're seeing like more and more powerful control and utility effects. Like for example, in this clip, we saw the shots placing ice walls, and they were like blocking and taunting enemies. I noticed, it seemed. How do you keep these sorts of effects like feeling powerful and relevant in boss fights without just kind of breaking the fight or trivializing them?
I mean, on some level, like we have to be able to let players use those tools in boss fights because otherwise there's no point in them. Like I really want it to be the kind of game where you can use that kind of more control type stuff. And I mean, like it's funny because a lot of the designers, when we talk to them, we're like, "Hey, we should allow this," and they're like, "Oh my god, it's crazy because like it's going to be way too easy." Like, and then Mark will look at it and he goes, "It's not that broken. It's not that broken." It's like you look at some of the stuff you can do in PoE 1, and I'm like, the ability to like freeze people in place with walls is like nothing compared to like the ridiculousness that your character can get to. So yeah, like when you actually think about it, like it's not that broken really. I mean, and we want players to have fun at the end of the day, right? We want them to be able to use those tools, and I quite enjoy it. But in particular, though, with the ice, though, those walls, once a monster gets above a certain size, they no longer get blocked by them, and they run through them. They still get they explode. So Ursia, you might have noticed, like the baby wasn't able to get through the walls, but Ursia can run through them, and then they just get that little detonation. So the skill actually changes a bit. Like against small monsters, they have to like stop and attack. It completely blocks them in, and they can't get through. But against large monsters, the monster rolls right through it, but then they explode and get chilled. So it kind of changes the function a little bit for boss versus the small monsters, and so that's why that particular skill I think is actually fine in that regard. So
Però
there's
che
little
ci
tricks
stiamo
like that. We can do. And I
capendo,
think
perché
I honestly really enjoy the stuff we're doing with monster size, which was never a factor in PoE 1 design.
io poi
Like
me lo
monster
riguardo
size
con
makes
calma la
what you
parte
say, like,
dell'1,
bigger, like the
me la
large monster. It all makes
studio
some kind of physical
perché
sense on some level.
voglio...
You know, the bigger
Magari
monsters
escono
make
anche le
sense,
patch
so we'll
notes
have that happen, and
appena
that can
finisce
kind
sta
of
roba,
give
quindi
it a
saranno già
bit more control
uscite.
in that way as well.
Non lo so.
Does this give you Mark some interesting tools to play with when designing bosses?
Yeah, I
Ancora.
mean, generally, yes. I've had rants about this
Vado a
before.
prendere qualcosa da mangiare perché mi sto...
I love the object size. I like things pushing you around, and I like that
Yeah.
a small monster can't and a large monster can, and like things like the knockback and just the thing feeling very physical and as it would, I guess, in real life is quite important to me, and it makes the game feel just way more grounded. Like you're actually in there and it makes sense as opposed to. I mean, that's something about the mercenary as well. I know this is tangential, but I'll just get into it. Like when I don't know if you will notice, but when you fire at a monster on the ground, like that area had babies in it, the crossbow aims down and shoots down.
Yes,
Like
that was a change that was also absolutely needed.
whereas in PoE 1 and like if there's a little like the little insects, for example, down there, you'll fire your bow and the arrow will just go this and hit it, and it's like it doesn't feel right. Now you may wonder, okay, well, how can it pierce if it aims down? And the answer is it can't. But
I mean, it does a bit. 'Cause,
Vi
like,
rendete
some-
conto
sure,
che
it
stanno parlando
goes through and then
di
hits the
come
ground,
quando
but, like,
spari in basso
it does
la
change the
balestra
gameplay.
mira
Like,
in
it
basso?
makes it feel way more realistic, and you're
Nel
not
senso,
just, like, shooting
scusate che mi sono
One thing we
caduti
didn't see in the demo, but actually, like now, the collision geometry for everything is actually modeled correctly to everything, even the stuff outside the gameplay space. So you can fire
Fighissimo,
it out over the buildings and like it'll hit the roofs and like bounce down on the
Però
roofs.
davvero mi devi interrompere al
It actually
3.23
has like all of that physical.
per dirmi queste
Even
cose.
those problems in
Che quando
PoE 1
spari
where
in
like,
basso miri in basso.
slam like over a ravine, your character will go down, up, down.
Yeah.
No more of that. No more.
Yeah, so like we've got
Get
lots
rid
of
of all of
yeah,
that.
yeah. Like there's a lot of physical stuff. In fact, like and also just things like arrows hitting like empty space and like stuff like that. Like now they all exactly hit the geometry and like there's lots of there's I mean once again it comes back to all the engine stuff we had to fix in order to make the mercenary possible. Like it was just like we were like okay we can no longer tolerate all of this like not physical stuff. Anymore. We have to actually make it right. So yeah, there was a big lot of changes required, and it makes just everything feel a lot more realistic and kind of grounded, which is good.
One of the reasons why the groundedness matters here is because one of the factors that varies from fight to fight is the terrain you're fighting in. And so if you can interact with the shape of that terrain in a different way and it actually has an impact, it will make the fights feel different.
I like how it affects the monsters too, because instead of just shooting at a wall when you're up on an elevation, they'll actually like pathfind backwards to try and get a line of sight to you with their projectile. Which is
because
yeah.
they take into account height and pathfinding now,
Yeah.
so they actually have to find like a line of sight to you, you know, up a cliff and this kind of thing. Like there's some pretty interesting things.
Wow,
Sono
very
tutte
cool.
cose
So for demonstrations and things
fighissime
like demos and stuff,
probabilmente.
you're obviously going to be showing off as many different abilities and combos and stuff like that as
Ma sono
possible,
tutte cose
like more
molto
than you typically
tecniche.
have on an actual character. But I'm curious then, kind of what are your expectations or hopes for PoE 2 in terms of how many skills and combos a well-refined character build is going to be running at endgame?
I mean,
Bene la nostra domanda. Finalmente. Cosa vi aspettate per PoE 2? Quante skill e quante combo dovrebbe usare un personaggio in endgame?
personally believe that you should have probably 2 to 3. 2 is going to be very common. I think 3 will be pretty common as well in terms of like core combos for your character. And then depending on the
2 o 3
context,
combo.
like what's going on with the boss fight or just the monsters, you'll decide to do one or the other. But I kind of what I quite like about the way the gameplay is and what we try to strive for is like you've got some plan in mind for what you're doing, but like no plan survives contact with the enemy kind of thing, and like you know the enemies are doing things that's kind of disrupting that, and then you're like, oh, I should need to use the skill to kind of like deal with that. And so that a lot of the time you can have like I think you saw this on the druid as well. It's like the entire the druid basically had synergy for the entire set of skills that it had. But in reality, when you're playing, it's like you can't kind of get off the full combo all the time. You need to kind of like sometimes you can, and then you get a huge amount of damage. But the rest of the time, you're kind of using individual subparts of the combo that like.
Dice tipo che il druido, volendo, ha una mega combo da 5-6 cose, ma non riesci a usarla sempre. Cioè, quella volta che ti viene fighissimo, ma le altre volte non ti viene, magari ne fai 2, magari ne fai 3.
Like interesting combos going on, and it should be very context sensitive, right? Like what the enemies are doing.
Comunque è tristissimo sto pezzo.
Like that is, I guess, the sort of key element of that. And so, and in order to achieve that, you're going to
Veramente
have like a few different
l'intervista più noiosa che c'è. Non sarebbe mai dovuto andare al grande
Before we move
pubblico
on to
questo.
Path of Exile 1 and Affliction questions, we've
Oh.
got just a couple more chat questions to ask. Do you need to spend all the crossbow ammo to reload, or can you reload manually as well? Is there like a hotkey or something for that?
Yeah, you can reload manually. So effectively, if you use the ammo skill again, it'll reload the thing. So yeah, there is a reload.
Great. Will Path of Exile 2 be cross-platform at all?
Yes, it will be. Absolutely.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Will boss and monster balancing be done around WASD movement balancing, or will be keeping mouse movement players in mind as well?
Sarà
We're always going to
cross-platform.
make sure that it's okay for both type of players, but I wouldn't say that the balancing has to be hugely different, honestly. Like, especially with the dodge roll and everything, you can get where you need to go with click to move as well. It's just that the immediacy of WASD just sort of feels better, or you know, like I think that I don't think there's necessarily a huge balancing task there, but maybe Mark, you've got a different feeling.
No, it's ultimately the same.
Yeah.
But there's some tiny things like to give a real picky example, it's like when you click to move, you pathfind.
Comunque non so se avete visto
And with
che sono tutti e tre seduti esattamente allo stesso modo.
but a bit
Cioè,
less, and so
questi
like,
sono dei
more
mega
likely to run
nerd
into a,
che non sanno stare
where
seduti
if you were to
incomodi
click
e gli hanno insegnato mettetevi così.
a point, your character might
Come
run
mettiamo
into
le
that
mani?
and
No,
then be
mettila lì.
stuck because
Questa come la
you
metto?
actually
Mettila lì.
navigate
E
around
sono
yourself.
fississimi,
Yes.
Chris Wilson è nella stessa identica posizione da 20 minuti e c'ha la mano sinistra appoggiata sotto la gamba, mano destra col mic di un microfono sopra. È assurdo, cioè non vedi un filo di rilassatezza nelle loro posture.
The things like that like are a little bit easier, whereas with the click to move, like you're less inclined.
Marco è il più agitato di tutti, lo vedi proprio con la mano davanti che si copre.
Dodge roll, which takes a bit longer. So there are like a few cases there where it's like
Cerca di tirarla via, ma dice no, devo tenerla lì perché mi hanno detto di tenerla lì.
But yeah, ultimately, there's not a lot you need to change balance-wise.
Madonna, vado a prendere qualcosa da bere che c'ho la gola secca,
So we'll be
ragazzi.
seeing a bit more for from PoE 2 between now and the beta then?
Of course, you know, well, I mean, at the very least, there'll be, you know, the next league live stream and everything. We'll definitely want to have some stuff to show then. But as we get towards the beta, we're going to be showing a heck of a lot more. And I also want to make sure that we get I want to do a deep dive like this for every character class, so that we can sort of see what to expect. And I think there are also good references for the type of gameplay that a player in terms of when you're picking a class, like what class do I want to pick, being able to see what type of gameplay you can expect is I think a good thing. So I want to have one of those for all the classes if we can.
Yeah. Great, and you have a lot of classes
Anche
now for deep dives, so that's a lot of content.
We do.
Great. All right, so moving on to Path of Exile 1 and
Oh,
Affliction first.
dai che
So
si parte.
Affliction looks like you're kind of walking through a carpet of cockroaches with a candle to scare them off. Do you guys ever worry when you design a league mechanic like this that you're going to be just scaring some players off? They're just going to nope out because of that?
No.
Stai dicendo che ci sono gli insetti,
It
sei
is a
paura
horror
che
game and there's a lot of
qualcuno non
horror.
gioca perché ha paura che ha detto
We've
no,
had a few examples though, like
sega.
just to give a small anecdote of there was, I think it was the last or maybe the current, the mystery box that has the spider portal in it. We actually had people like
Il
specifically
mystery
go,
box
I
aveva il
don't want
ragno.
to buy this mystery box because I have arachnophobia and I don't want to get that spider. The way I can get everything but the spider from it, and the short answer is no. But I mean, how does that person kill Weaver or get through?
Yeah.
I don't know. But no, generally, the game has a lot of horrific stuff in it, and as you can even see from what's going on in that mercenary demo, we're not pulling our punches when it comes to that stuff for sure.
I remember Eric came across a list of things not to include in games because they scare the players. Things like objects that are too sharp and pointy, or trypophobia triggering clusters of small irregular holes. And he's like, "This is very useful."
Design Bible.
Add these.
Yeah, exactly.
Capito?
Great.
Hanno preso una lista di cose
So, talking about
da non
mechanics,
mettere nei giochi, ma
that are allowed to explore the
mi piace
wild
sta lista.
with are somewhat of a limited resource, it seems. Is this a timer or is it a distance traveled, some kind of mechanic like that?
It's distance traveled, but it's distance traveled into the bugs and the cockroaches and stuff.
Yep.
So it's how much of that you can purge away. So if you run back on a path you've already been, like let's say you run up some way and then you want to go back and then go a different direction, like running back where you've been doesn't use the resource, but running anywhere new does.
I think that'll be a popular decision instead of it being say a hard timer.
Yeah, for sure.
So how long is a venture into the wild?
Quindi non c'è un
How long are
timer,
you, exiting your map?
ma c'è una
But it's
distanza.
traveled into the bugs and the cockroaches and stuff.
Yep.
So it's how much of that you can purge away. So if you run back on a path you've already been, like let's say you run up some way and then you want to go back and then go a different direction, like running back where you've been doesn't use the resource, but running anywhere new does.
I think that'll be a popular decision instead of it being say a hard timer.
Yeah, for sure.
So how long is a venture into the wildwood typically? Like how long are you exiting your map?
Well, even typical is somehow subjective here, but obviously it depends on your character. But I mean, anywhere. I would expect most people to be in there kind of a minute, upwards of 2 minutes. But
it sort of depends on what you run into though, because if you run into a boss fight, it can it can be a while.
It does depend what you find, but I mean, you could be in there as short as 30 seconds, or or a lot less if you're just not really caring where you're going. But that is not the right tactic to have at all.
And there isn't time pressure here in any way. You can be in there for a quarter of an hour if you're just incredibly methodical and barely move.
I don't think that anyone would be doing that, but yeah.
You can.
We are catering to slower players who don't like the gotta go fast thing. You can go fast. It's more efficient to go fast, but you don't have to.
I wanted, wanted something that was normalized a bit more between faster and slower players. Like you can do it at your own pace as opposed to feeling ultra stressed. And a faster player can do it as fast as they want, and that's still fine.
Excellent. So you get these wisps, and you free them. They go into your map, and they infect monsters, and you make them drop more loot. Are they more likely to choose more powerful enemies like rares and bosses, or is it just fully random?
Gli sta chiedendo se il Sentinel, cioè quelli che porti fuori, che poi vanno sui mostri, è random o puoi indirizzarli in qualche modo?
They are more likely to pick bosses and rares or higher rarity monsters going down.
Sono più likely to prendere boss rari,
a chance for multiple wisp types to go into one monster, right? So
yeah.
Scusa?
Yeah, bosses and rares or higher rarity monsters going down, yes.
And otherwise there would have been like no chance for multiple wisp types to go.
Ah, ok, questo per fare in modo che il mostro magari ne prenda 2 o 3 dello stesso.
But it doesn't always happen. It's kind of it's variable.
As a typical Path of Exile player, I immediately thought of abuse cases for this. Can you like kill all the monsters in a map except the boss and then just go in and come out and then free the wisp into the boss?
Minchia, è un genio. Cioè, è un genio, Zig. Posso ammazzare tutti i mostri tranne il boss? Entrare nel coso, portare fuori il coso e fare in modo che tutte vadano sul boss della mappa?
Stacking it
Well,
up.
thankfully, as we're also PoE players, we have also thought of this. We don't think of everything, but at least in that case, no, it is a chance per monster. So if you clear the whole map and then go and do it, the
Non
result
funziona, raga.
is, well, it's actually
Porco
detrimental
Giuda.
for you.
Yeah. And the wildwood always appears at the start of the map. So that means that you always like have the chance, like that way you get the most, just to make sure that you get the most what do you call it,
È
equity,
sempre all'inizio della
or
mappa il
strong equity
wild.
or whatever out of doing it. So like, you know,
A little like Delirium where the mirror would spawn.
exactly, it is exactly like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Questa mi sono meccanica da guerria. Molto da
Done this for a
guerria.
while now. I guess.
Some experience.
Yeah.
So some players love mechanics in maps and others seem to love ones that cause them to take a break from map. There's definitely some divide there. Interestingly, I noticed that Affliction is a little bit of both. It's a portal, but it juices your map afterwards. How do you folks like to balance the desires of the player base when it comes to designing leagues like this?
Ultimately, we just like to do a bit of all of it. Sometimes it's out of map, sometimes it's in map, sometimes in this case it's a bit of both. Like there isn't really some, you know, elaborate decision that goes into it. It's just kind of like we feel like it's time for one or the other.
I mean, we definitely have discussions of like, oh, you know, we've done a couple of an area ones, let's do an out of area one. Oh, we've done some out of area ones, let's do an area one. Like, you know, in this case, we were like, it just sort of felt good to have both things. So you know, it was good. But yeah, like honestly, we try to just have a variety.
It's this kind of concept, at least that I use internally, which is what shape is the combat, and we want to try all the different shapes we can do, and we haven't run out of shapes yet.
This shape technically is whatever shape you want to because you can run. So it's an undefined shape.
All right.
I have to always look out for my co-op buddies. How does Affliction work in multiplayer?
So once you die, you can't go back in. Just worth noting. Technically, that's multiplayer or single player, but only the map owner can, or if they're not present, I believe it nominates someone else, but I'll make sure that's the case if not. Can actually reveal fog or the mist, whatever, the bugs.
Solo chi apre la mappa può rivelare
so the
la
expectation is your
strada.
party members kind of follow them around.
Gli altri lo seguono.
The wisps that you collect, it's the same amount, so they're just a shared pool. Like it doesn't.
Any player who collects wisps will go to the primary player.
Yeah.
So like they're all.
Quindi multiplayer.
There's effectively the map owner is the one in charge of the of exploring, basically. Yeah.
But anyone can pick them up if you want to spread out.
Multiplayer ce lo facciamo con
It works in
Ultimatum, ce lo
multiplayer.
facciamo.
Due to the
Madonna.
nature of the rewards, just being based on the monster's drops, they will scale with like party drops like normal. So there's no like, they just work as standard multiplayer drops would work.
Right.
Great. And we get this new ascendancy system as a reward for this, which seems quite significant, especially seeing some of the specific bonuses there. How challenging is it to actually unlock these Wildwood ascendancies and gain all of their points?
So you can get 8 points per class. You get your first 2 points when you meet the NPCs, which occurs relatively early. I think we have and it is slightly RNG based.
Quindi prendo punti easy.
But you can increase the chance of finding them by following the trails of wisps. They will lead to them.
So the different colors have different things at the end of the trails, so you can kind of pick which direction you want to go.
And each color associates to an NPC. So I think if you can start appearing around Act 2, and then the expectation is by end of Act 5, you've probably found each of them once.
Cioè, li hai trovati entro l'atto 5.
Points, and then they'll give you a quest if you spec into that class to find more wisps or kill some monsters, like real basic quests.
Non esiste che io lo faccio durante gli altri.
And then you get your fourth
È
point,
lentissima quella roba.
third and fourth points, and then you have a quest to kill like a mini boss, and then it'll give you your fifth and sixth, and then the final 2 points are from killing the final boss of the league, which is probably relatively difficult. Like that's a level 83 kind of maybe equivalent to say like Lycia from Sanctum, or not quite pinnacle boss, but like just below it kind of thing. So that will be hard. So you could argue the first 6 points, the first 2 points are very easy. First 6 easier than probably say Labyrinth or the normal Ascendancy equivalent, but the last 2 points will be
Ok, i primi 6 punti sono più facili del labirinto.
And this is in parallel / addition to your existing ascendancy class and its progress. You have 2 classes here to clarify.
Yeah.
Bravo Chris che l'hai detta questa cosa. Le tieni entrambi, mantieni la tua, aggiungi quella.
pretty cool. Those charms. So the unique specters from the Breaker of Oaths, including bosses like the Hydra, was certainly a surprise. Can you have more than one Hydra Spectre or like an army of bosses?
You can have
proprio
up to
l'idra.
your spectre limit of Hydras, but they cannot be desecrated. So once you have it, once you have the item, you buy it from him. You can only spectre it once. Once it dies, then you have to buy more of them. But yes, it will be hard to find them.
You can trade them.
Yes, you can trade for them. I really wanted this whole, like, I wanted you to be able to find the
Puoi
NPCs
tradare gli spettri dell'idra.
effectively buy
Quindi
something
cioè
from them that could be worth multiple
puoi
divines,
veramente andare a
like,
raccoglierli e tenerli per venderli a
Hydra
quelli
could
che
be
li
worth
vogliono.
multiple divines. Like, let's see if we can do that.
Note, you can buy these and trade them even if you aren't that class.
Yeah, of course.
So there's a reason to look at the shop for all of the NPCs, regardless of whether or not you're that ascendancy class.
Raga, cioè, la cosa più figa del mondo.
Fragility of the Hydra.
Yes, well, it is worth noting the Hydra's health in particular is relatively low, so you do have to keep it alive. The specters in general they're pretty interesting. There's a lot I've tried to go for where we've gone and tried to
È
give
fighissima
stats
sta,
that
è
other builds wouldn't use.
la
Like, there's one, for example, where one of its
è la
properties
lega più
just
figa
says
del mondo,
your
raga.
owner, as in the player has 5% more attack damage.
Scusa, non ho capito cosa ho detto, lo riprendo un
The
attimo.
fragility of the Hydra.
The specters in general they're pretty interesting. There's a lot I've tried to go for where we've gone and tried to give stats that other builds wouldn't use. Like, there's one, for example, where one of its properties just says your owner, as in the player has 5% more attack damage or melee attack
Parlando
damage. I
degli
can't remember which of
spettri,
those two.
stanno
And
facendo cose
then if you get
fighissime
all
con
your
questi
specters, you
spettri,
get like what 40, 30, 40,
che però sono
42 attack
monouso.
damage. But now you're a melee build that's investing in plus spectre limit, and there's
Quindi
some
il
huge
melee
differences
magari
in
c'ha
what
di
you're
due
doing there. And
spettri che
then,
non
of
si
course,
sa
they
mai,
need minion life, otherwise they're all just going to die. And
che però devi comprare.
hopefully some
Cioè o li trovi o li
weird, interesting
compri.
builds that come out
E
of
se
this,
muoiono,
unorthodox builds using specters that
o ne
you
trovi
can
altri o ne compri altri.
And you had that interesting one with Fire Fury and.
Oh yeah, there's a kind of, I don't know what they're called, but it's effectively Fire Fury and Hellrake, and they specifically, the Fire Fury one says becomes empowered if there is if you also have a Hellrake Spectre, and the Hellrake Spectre says the same thing. So then you want to run two different ones, which again
E
is
scombano anche tra di loro, cioè se ne
kind
hai
of
due di un
abnormal, 'cause
certo
normally when
tipo
you play a
si
Spectre build, you stack
potenziano.
a lot of the same thing. So
Madonna,
promoting
madonna,
some
raga,
just different
madonna,
gameplay
sto
around that.
impazzendo.
So there's something going on between the Fire Fury and the Hellrake. Then they have some backstory together, I
There's always
guess.
something going
They're
on.
empowering each other, yeah, for sure.
Cioè mi hanno fatto 40 minuti di due palle così su POE2 e adesso mi tirano fuori ste perle che i mili useranno gli spettri perché gli spettri gli rendono il mili più forte. Cioè dopo 40 minuti di due palle così. Ma è fighissima sta cosa, raga. Cioè è la lega più figa del mondo. Io da qua alla prossima settimana devo fare in modo di farmi una build e partire e smettere di vivere, quindi devo fare il mondo. Devo fare tutto il lavoro che devo fare entro fine gennaio praticamente, perché sennò non lo faccio più. Come cazzo si fa con una lega del genere? Cioè, ho paura. Ultimatum.
Take note.
Yeah, here we go. New fanfic in progress. The charms for the Wildwood Primalists, they capture random parts of other ascendancy nodes and allow you to create a new one in kind of like a build your own ascendancy fashion. What sort of limitations
Cioè,
are there?
la primal è il Scion fatto bene. Tu prendi i pezzi delle ascendancy dei tipi e li mischi insieme. Non è che c'hai delle mezze ascendancy sfigate, c'hai i pezzi. Veramente i pezzi. Vuoi che tutto il danno venga convertito in fire? Bam! C'hai quello. Vuoi non prendere il rifletto damage sui critici? Bam! C'hai quello. Madonna. Vuoi uno slot? C'hai uno slot. Cioè, È fighissimo, però probabilmente sono indebolitissimi, quindi non è esattamente così. Sarebbe fighissimo se fosse così, il Sion non è esattamente così e neanche il Primal non è è molto indebolita, ma l'idea è quella. Quindi fare un Sion Primal sarebbe tipo cioè mi fa paura solo l'idea.
Any power from any node?
You can't get anything. I can't remember exactly what you can and can't get, but there are some stuff that is like too. It's binary and ultra powerful, and like that's just too much power to give from a single node like that. That can
Ok, non puoi avere tutto e diceva che ci sono alcune cose che sono troppo binarie, quindi o sì o no e troppo potenti. Quindi tipo non potrai avere Fortify fisso, non potrai avere lo slot fisso, non potrai avere... Cioè quelle cose fisse così probabilmente non te le danno, come il fatto, non lo so, dei critici che ignorano la resistenza elementale o quelle cose lì.
have two modifiers on it. So you can't get everything, but you can get most things, and even in some cases where they are binary, we've made non-binary versions of that property where it's like can either be chance-based or
Ha detto che però in alcuni casi, anche quando erano binarie, le hanno fatte non binarie, tipo slot, ma mi sembra che c'era scritto hai il 20% di beccare slot, che è quasi, nella maggior parte dei casi è quasi come averlo sempre.
percentage-based, like a portion of it. But they do stack as well. So, like for example, you can
E
get
staccano.
3 sockets, and obviously you can get like we showed, say the occultist curse explosion. Like if you just want to go all in on the chance of that, you could try and get that on all 3 of them.
E staccano nel senso che, cioè, tu puoi averne tre uguali. Quindi tipo, dicevano, Coldest Chance Explosion era al 20%, tu puoi metterne tre e avere il 60%. Cioè,
But again, it's going to be pretty rare. They're unmodifiable, but again, tradable. And I'm expecting, again, going under the philosophy of I want you to be able to find these NPCs and occasionally find something worth
questa è la nuova
I do
expedition,
want it
cioè,
to be
uno fa sta roba, si prende le sue cose, si compra quelle, le vende, fa tutto sta meccanica, fa tutto, è fighissima, è
that
fighissima.
occasionally you find one and you get multiple divines worth of a trade because you find just the perfect charm.
And again, you don't have to be that class to find the charm.
Yes, we'll keep reiterating that. Yes.
Always
there's
check
some
the shops.
Yeah. The shops
there's
is
some wealth to be had.
Chris continua a dire che chiunque può prenderli, non c'è bisogno
Yeah,
che tu
no, it
sia
sounds
quella
like
classe
it.
per
Are
comprarli.
there any
Chiunque può
limitations to this
comprarli, se li
primalist
trova.
shouting items at corpses thing? It's like, are people just going to be going around shouting at every corpse for extra loot?
Well, it's one of these interesting. This one's been very controversial. I'll point out internally. Don't get me wrong.
Sai che gli ha
Worth of a
chiesto?
trade because you find just the perfect charm.
And again, you don't have to be that class to find the charm.
Yes, we'll keep reiterating that. Yes.
Yeah,
Always
there's
check
some
the shops.
Yeah, the shops
there's
is
some wealth to be had.
should be valuable. Hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it sounds like it. Are there any limitations to this primalist shouting items at corpses thing? It's like, are people just going to be going around shouting at every corpse for extra loot?
Well,
Ah,
it's
cosa
one of
dello
these interesting.
shouting
This one's been very controversial. I'll point out
dei
internally.
Warcries.
See, for me, I really like it because it's a thing where if you're an efficient, well, okay, let's think of it a few different ways. Firstly, if you're destroying corpses, it doesn't work, right? There's no body left to get loot from. So you can deal with spikers and or with the porcupines and among other things. But so
No.
oh, we had a bit of a
We're back now.
Discord dip there. I'm going to just
Okay.
start that part again. But one thing to note is that, yes, you have to have the corpse around, which means you have to be playing a build that doesn't destroy corpses, meaning, of course, you have to deal with the porcupine Goliaths. I don't know who heard that before, but whatever. And then the other thing to note is it actually rewards slower players more than faster players because you have to walk
Ok, è una
cry, which is
meccanica che
cooldown
premia
boost.
i
Are you really
giocatori
going to wait
lenti.
around meticulously war crying on every single corpse, or are you just going to move on and kill more monsters and run more maps? And so if you want to get the most out of your map, of course that's a way to do it. But if you want to get most out of your time, that is not the way to do it. So yes, you could like war cry, bind it to your left click and then just war cry whenever it's available and get whatever loot you can get.
I reckon opening the chests is the
opening
that's time efficient.
Opening chests is a big
Yeah,
time
that's
saver.
the main use of that skill, I would say.
But it is worth note just to get into some specifics of how that works as well. It doesn't care about the monster's quantity and rarity. It does care about map quant and rarity. So a boss is just going to occasionally drop like an item, if that, it doesn't like redrop all its drops, so it's not like ultra powerful. Due to that, it's probably honestly going to yield a little bit more. Like it's more for like getting a little bit of extra currency than it is getting like unique items and rare
Ok,
items and
cioè
stuff like that.
il Warcry dà currency più che altro.
I'll ask the
Si
obvious
basa
question
sulla
that
quantity e
you
la
get
quality
when you
della
added a
mappa. Più
backpack
la mappa è
inventory
gioissata, più è
expansion. Do you
forte.
think you'll give this to people outside of the Primalist?
Powerful. Due to that, it's probably honestly going to yield a
Non
little bit
riesco a
more.
sentire le
It's
domande
more
che
for like
dice,
getting a little
cazzo.
bit of extra currency than it is
Dovrei
getting like
fermarlo.
unique items and rare items and stuff like that.
I'll ask the obvious question that you knew you'd get when you added a backpack inventory expansion. Do you think you'll give this to people outside of the Primalist?
Short answer, no. But I mean, look, we chuck these in, we experiment for 3 months, and we see. This was also the node of the second highest level of controversy internally.
Mi sta chiedendo del backpack in più di quegli 8 spazi che c'erano. Se lo darà a tutti, dico, beh, adesso lo proviamo per 3 mesi e poi vediamo.
Look, we'll give it a go. We'll see what happens. But like, I do not see that thing returning outside of the Primalists after the league, even if the league happens to go core.
Yeah.
Controversial league design, it sounds like, internally. Oof.
Well, they're 3 month
Tension.
experiments
Yeah,
essentially.
we like to try things.
I say controversy. It's fun.
It's not like there's a shouting match or anything going on, right? Like it's just.
Well, one of us isn't shouting. No.
Si vede che qua stanno litigando un botto su sta cosa.
Back
Ci hanno
questions on
discusso per un
Affliction
botto.
before we move on to some of the other features. When you enter the Wildwood, do you start at the last place you're at? Is it like a continual exploration, or is it a new area each time?
It's not continuous, no.
Ok,
we
ogni volta
are-
che
it is
entro è un'area
effectively an
diversa.
infinite forest, but you're you're put in a random place every single time. It's new exploration. It isn't a continuous.
E bisogna seguire le luci, perché le luci portano ai tesori.
It isn't really like Delve because it doesn't have the whole like big map or anything like that.
Are the wisps tradable or collected as currency items at all?
No, I mean they're tradable to the vendors, but that's not really
Yeah.
trading. They're usable as currency for the vendors, but aside from that, no, they are. And
Non sono tradabili le lucciole.
Because once you leave the
Non so perché ho fatto così per le lucciole, ma
you
era
don't get to
carino.
keep them at all. No.
Era carino.
And just clarifying for people that missed this detail, you'll be able to use the regular Ascendancy class alongside the Wildwood Ascendancy
Correct.
class. It's extra
Yes,
on top.
You will eventually get 8 points in both. Yes.
Sweet. Can monsters attack from the Fog of War in Affliction, or only once they're fully revealed? Ooh, good question.
You will
Oh,
not get
i mostri possono attaccare dalla Fog of War o devono essere rivelati prima di poter attaccare? Questa è una bella domanda.
not going to be like given an advantage as a range character to shoot into it, and you will not be attacked from it.
Ok, Fog of War rende i mostri immortali e non attaccano. Quindi non puoi attaccare gente nella Fog of War, ma non viene neanche attaccato.
They will not do similar to Delve Darkness. They will come out of the darkness before they engage with you. And generally, only things you reveal
Un po' come
will
il
actually
Darkness del
engage with
Delve.
you.
Do map modifiers from the area you entered the Wildwood from affect the Wildwood, or is it a completely separate zone in that regard?
The map mods do affect it, yes. And
Oh wow.
where it
Map
doesn't increase
modifier
the amount of wisps
hanno
you get, it
effetto
does increase the
sulla,
loot you get in
sul
general,
posto lì
but
e
it
su
most
Wild War.
collectively applies with the bonuses the wisps give monsters afterwards. So you are obviously to get the max rewards like normal, you're incentivized
But
to
pack size works on the monsters in the Wildwood.
Oh yes.
And because pack size works on them, that means you do get more wisps if you increase pack size.
Ok, pack size è importante, ragazzi, e quindi Harvest a palla.
Wisps already in them in the forest, and they will give wisps. So yes, pack size will increase the amount of wisps you can get.
Which actually means that pack size can increase the duration that you can stay in.
Pack size vi fa stare dentro per più tempo nel Wild War.
Oh, different. All right, because that's the right. Okay, so it just increase the rewards then. Yeah. Okay.
Just more rewards.
Yeah,
And
between this
Ah
and
no,
this,
aspetta.
then they will give wisps. So yes, pack size will increase the amount of wisps you can get.
Which actually means that pack size can increase the duration that you can stay in the Wildwood, if I understand that correctly.
Different wisps.
Oh, different. All right.
Ah, no. Ok, l'ha corretto, mi fa no. Sono wisp diversi.
Yeah, between this and the wisps you're freeing, it sounds like a bit of a map juicing league then.
That was, I mean, that was what I was going for. I really like things like Delirium where they overlap with all the other leagues.
Yep.
It's worth noting on that point. you might think, okay, the wisps disperse into the air and affect monsters once you exit. It will also affect monsters that are then spawned afterwards. So if you then go and activate a breach, there is like a portion of the breach monsters will be dusted as well, and thus their rewards and difficulty will also be increased. So yeah, it overlaps with any in area league, I believe, as long as the monster gives loot and experience. Which obviously, if it doesn't, you don't really care about it. So.
This league sounds cracked. I like it. All right. Talking a bit about Ultimatum, the long-awaited return. It has been a long time in the returning. Did you face some specific challenges with its re-implementation or something?
Main challenge, I guess, was finding time to actually do the rebalance and reassess it. But like once we found the time, which we did, we got
Veramente
through all that,
Ultimatum.
and I mean, now it's finally coming back.
Io ero uno dei pochi giocatori che
It's
tutta la
just
Lega
about
almeno
time.
una
We've got
settimana della
so much
Ultimatum
we
se la
both want to
sparava.
do, and just finding the resources to be able to get someone to fully reassess it and make the changes that we want it can be challenging for sure.
So it's not just something you wanted to just slap back in as it was. Then it sounds like it's changed a fair bit.
It's had a substantial amount of work done to it. Like, it is
L'hanno
quite a lot.
cambiato tanto Ultimatum, eh.
And obviously, it's going to be very different to how it was given the Atlas passives as well, and how you can modify it and change it, which will be relatively fun. But taking that into consideration as well is something that we didn't have to deal with before that we do now.
Why do you think that Ultimatum was so popular and so requested to return that it was like the #1 thing asked about at ExileCon? Is there anything to like learn from that for future league designs?
Well, I think about it, and also why do I
Ultimatum,
think I like
te lo
it.
dico io cos'era. Ultimatum era fighissimo perché facevi dei party della Madonna. È stata l'ultima meccanica in cui veramente, sì, l'ultima credo, ti buttavi dentro in party, facevi le cose da 6 nella query, andavi in giro a fare il leacher, ti facevi l'ultimatum, prendevi un sacco di currency, cioè era bello giocare in gruppo con l'ultimatum. E questa è la cosa figa.
I mean, the mod selection is fun. I like how it works in parties as well, and I like, for people who know my Aurabot addiction, I love playing in parties where you get to.
Poi vabbè, io ai tempi avevo un personaggio all'87 forse, il più forte che avevo, o al 92, non mi ricordo. Comunque non facevo 1.000.000 di DPS, facevo fatica ad arrivare al livello 6-7 delle 10 cose. E quindi, cioè, per me era una sfida tutte le volte, anche se sceglievo i modifier, quelli più facili, così. Era difficile. Però era bello perché lo facevi in gruppo, andavi lì in 5, eravamo 5 sfigati. Sì, dai, cazzo che ce la facciamo, sì, vai, nella query, a livello 80, a fare l'ultimatum, a prendere 5 caos, e forse non riuscire a finirlo, forse sì. Ho beccato il Trial Master 2 volte in tutta la lega, e mi ha shottato, tipo, all'istante. Ma era bello perché si andava insieme, tutte le meccaniche dopo era come quella di questo giro, che è un po' il difetto, che tu fai la meccanica e vale per una persona sola. E, cioè, è vero che è quasi un solo game POE, però non può essere l'unico modo di giocare in gruppo che sia con un support e un carry, o con più support e un carry. Cioè, deve essere che tu vai di ignoranza in 4, bam, così, e cerchi di conquistare sto ultimatum. Quello è bello.
To vote on the mods, and you go and pick the mod that no one wants just because you want to. Or you're an aura bot and you pick that mod that causes your auras to apply to the enemies, and you just then hopefully your teammate, yeah.
And the double or nothing stuff is also very. I don't want to use the word addictive because that's a bad word these days, but definitely addictive.
Oh, I love that, and I think a lot of people resonate with that as well. Where you when you've got the divine orbs on the line, or the headhunter on the line, or like just whatever items on the line, it's like the thrill is just, you know, it gives you that adrenaline rush that like I almost used to get.
Okay, non vedo l'ora che inizi da 2.3 a 3.23, scusate.
It's risk reward, to put it another way, right? It's good risk reward stuff. Yeah.
Sure. Yes.
I think it had like a unique pacing too, with like intense action, break, intense action, break.
Oh yeah, for sure. I like that as well a lot. But
peccato che mi hanno tolto.
it's hard to say too many
Meta.
lessons
Potevano
learned. So
togliere i
it's just
torment.
or like how we can use things in the future. But I guess ultimately the risk reward and the pacing is probably the two biggest ones.
Mm.
Do you want to talk about what happened with the combat changes to do with rare monsters and stuff in Ultimatum?
Yeah, I think it was around the time there was a lot of
E non solo di andarci in ignoranza, ma quando lo incontravi nelle mappe e ci passavi vicino, ti sbatteva pure, è vero, cazzo, è vero che ti prendeva per il culo a Trial Master. È vero. Che era fighissimo. E tu, coglione, vieni qua, sei coraggio. Era bellissimo. Cazzo, mi hai sbloccato un ricordo, è vero.
there was a bit of like, how do we make this harder that went on, and it ended up just ranking the rare monsters up. Like,
Minchia.
there was just
Ho
points where
paura io di
buying
Stroke Start.
rare of those blood chieftains on your screen, and the problem with that
Non
is
lo so,
with, like, obviously now looking at
Non lo so, mi sa che le voice line le hanno tenute...
that adds.
Le hanno
and
tenute
you
uguali.
can't even tell what's
Boh.
happening. Like, there was a lot of going on in that league where there's just a massive crossfire of projectiles and just like a whole bunch of rare monsters, and like, so we've gone with almost a more what we call expedition style balance, which is just like tone that down but make each monster individually more difficult and more meaningful. So it should be that it is
Comunque ci saranno, sto dicendo,
less, like more comprehensible in the
ci
moment
saranno
as to
meno
what you're actually
mostri,
fighting and what you're actually doing,
ma saranno
and
più
still
forti.
difficult, as opposed to just like bam everything, like crank up the rare monster number to infinity.
Un po' come hanno fatto con Arch Nemesis, quindi potrebbe far cagare Ultimatum. Questa me la riguardo, sto pezzo come lo riguardo, perché se veramente diventa come Ultimatum, cioè se diventa come Arch Nemesis è un casino. Io ho cominciato con Ultimatum, diciamo, cioè ho giocato dal 2013-2014, ma giocavo in hardcore e praticamente arrivavo all'atto 3, all'atto 4, all'atto 5, ci ho messo forse 7 leghe a riuscire a far Kitava. Poi ho piantato lì di giocare, giocavo ogni tanto, facevo 1 o 2 settimane, poi smettevo, ma arrivavo alle mappe gialle, così. E ho cominciato l'ultima settimana di Ritual con i miei amici e da lì non ho più smesso. In softcore, perché almeno adesso riesco a fare le cose. Hanno aggiunto le voice line di Ranger e Sion. Oh! Finalmente, cazzo, col Sion c'ha delle voice fighissime, ma mi finiscono sempre. Io sì, perché le so a memoria ormai quelle del Sion. Gioco solo Sion. E quindi a un certo punto smetteva di dire le cose. Oh, sono gasatissimo per questa cosa, non vedo l'ora di arrivare. Quindi sono uscite le patch notes, eh. Dai, fammelo vedere. Fammi vedere la fine che...
been working pretty well with respect to our monster balance lately.
So Metamorph is getting removed as a part of this coming back of Ultimatum, with its unique rewards going to Ultimatum. Can you tell me a little bit about that decision, like to remove Metamorph?
Adesso gli chiede di Metamorph.
There, but the first is just the visual clarity of it again, going back to that, like, you put these monsters together and then it just does this kind of like morphing thing. I mean, look, I've played this a lot and it transforms it.
Aspetta, una cosa. Questi sono i miei Sion. Non ne ho tanti in realtà perché ho fatto pulizia. Perché prima li facevo, arrivavo all'80 e li tenevo, li ho cancellati. Però ecco, in questa lega c'ho Sion, questo l'ho fatto... Questo lo stavo livellando, vabbè. Non ne ho così tanti, pensavo averne di più. Aspetta, no. Ho dimenticato di rimettere... Questo, ok.
What killed me here? I actually don't know. And it is meant to be...
coming back of Ultimatum.
Been working pretty well with respect to
Allora, vediamo una domanda su Metamorph.
So Metamorph is getting removed as a part of this coming back of Ultimatum, with its unique rewards going to Ultimatum. Can you tell me a little bit about that decision, like to remove Metamorph?
There's a few things going on there, but the first is just the visual clarity of it again, going back to that, like, you put these monsters together and then it just does this kind of like morphing thing. I mean, look, I've played this
A
a
me
lot,
dispiace
so
perché
just,
rendeva un
it
botto
transforms
meta.
into
Non
swords
era...
and I'm dead. I'm like, I don't even know what just happened. Like, what?
Pensavo che glielo
I
dicesse
actually don't.
davvero, che gli dicesse...
And it is,
No, l'abbiamo
it is
tolto
the
il che non
case
ci
that
giocava
obviously I
nessuno,
know
faceva
what monsters
cagare.
I'm putting in, and I'm putting in this monster, this monster, this monster, and I know these do this.
Non
skill,
era
this does this, this
bello,
one's in the brain slot. It
Però
does this.
richiedeva pochissimo tempo e ti dava un
The
sacco
reality
di
is, like, it's
comprensione.
way too much to try and know and remember, and like there's hundreds of monsters with hundreds of skills going on there, and it's like you can't really tell. And so when you do put it together, it's like, oh, this I like these rewards, and you put those
Cioè,
in, and that's ultimately what you do as a player for that. And so you put in a monster, it spawns, and you maybe just insta die or you maybe not. And getting that
quello è
right
vero,
is
cioè
just
quando spawnava potevi morire
awful,
all'istante
I
senza
would say. Like,
accorgertene.
I love the mechanic in a nutshell of
Così.
you get to put monsters together to create a new boss fight, but it just wasn't working.
It was never my favorite league visually either. I just don't think it really looks that great.
E poi obiettivamente il meta nella Lega ancora. Ok,
I
si è
know we dropped.
bloccato. Ma il
I'm sure we'll get
Metamorph,
things back in just a second
quello...
here, folks. Until
Il Metamorph, quello nella... da Tane, cioè quello non l'ho mai fatto. Quello faceva Bruce. Allora, dovremmo essere praticamente alla fine della difficoltà tecniche. Comunque mi gasa, Estero, mi gasa e mi fa molta paura, perché io sono 2 o 3 settimane che non gioco a POE e sto bene, porca vacca, mi sto riprendendo fisicamente, sto portandomi in pari col lavoro che ho lasciato indietro, sto ricominciando ad avere interazioni sociali con la gente e adesso mi metti la lega più figa del mondo, mi metti ultimatum, mi metti... cioè, mi cambi il... mi fai un meta shift della Madonna, hanno detto, porco Giuda, sì, io non vivo più, dai, non so più cosa fare, cioè...
welcome back, folks.
Oh,
Apologies for the
non lo
technical
so,
difficulties.
ho paura di sta cosa.
Discord just decided to self-destruct for some reason and then required a computer reboot to get back in action.
Vai, Jonathan.
You guys might have made
I think
Tane a little mad.
Metamorph was a little bit unhappy about being removed, apparently.
So that brings us back to what we were talking about, just about Metamorph's removal, and basically it was a bit of a visual mess and a bit of like a gameplay feedback mess in terms of players not really knowing why they were killed and things like that as well.
È vero, però i Catalyst valgono veramente un botto. Quindi ragazzi, prossimo League Start, ultimatum, a palla proprio.
From a maintenance perspective.
Lo so già, faccio una Scion, Holy Relic, e vado di Cyclone a farmi gli ultimatum e Expedition.
Like there was quite a lot.
Già
Like,
deciso.
every time we added a monster, we had to do stuff relating to Metamorph, and like also the way it was originally made was just like a bit annoying. So there was certainly certainly there were a lot of designers who were happy to see it gone as well with regard to just maintenance stuff as well. So,
and we're careful before we remove content, right?
Oppure un buon vecchio,
but it's like
buon vecchio
there's certainly a
Cold
lot of factors there.
che l'avranno nerfato
Another
tantissimo.
thing about it, I guess the meta endgame thing where you put together 5 boss parts and do it in his lab, like there was that sad thing where because that area was a standalone area, it never got map mods. Like it felt like often the rewards and the difficulty were just underwhelming relative to doing them in the area. I mean, you're less likely to just get insta-killed in there at least. So in some ways it did it better in that it was more controlled and telegraphed, but in the other sense it was just...
Speriamo che non abbiano nerfato Cold Dot, anche perché in realtà sì, è un League Start bello, ma poi la gente lo molla, quindi...
Map mod damage, like,
Però come League Start è veramente...
It was just due for its removal, honestly.
Yeah, I certainly agree with a lot of issues that Metamorph had and experienced a lot of them myself, but I do think there was a good idea there. And like you said, with the boss parts going together, that actually felt like it worked a little bit more. But like you said, it wasn't quite there. So something to play with in the future, maybe.
Yeah, oh, for sure. The idea is, there is a sound idea there for sure that I'd like to see if we can play around with later and
aspetta. Ha fatto Tornado Shot. Perché non era la skill più forte del gioco. Ha deciso di... Ma sì, facciamogli un baffino. Ma porco giù. Ah sì, è vero, con la quality gli hanno messo 2 proiettili in più. Sì, che 2 proiettili in più, se poi gli aggiungi l'Ashes of the Star diventano 4. Praticamente c'hai dentro un Greater Multiple Projectile a gratis. Cioè, ma porco giù. Ma mi va Tornado Shot. Ma figa. Però in effetti sì, non funzionava bene con Return in Projectile, quindi la gente era indecisa se usare quello, Lightning Arrow, sotto i 5 mirror di prezzo. Quindi, cioè, vuoi non buffarlo e farlo diventare un league starter? Ma porco Giuda. No, finiamo questo che poi devo andare a letto, cazzo è l'una. Ho cominciato alle 11, doveva durare un'ora sta roba.
Vision in some way. Hopefully.
Madonna.
You get the situation where in order to keep it, you kind of want to do all the work to rework it, and if you're doing all that work, you may as well just bring automation.
Ma fai, cioè, adesso, scusate, dice Mordred che lui League starta Lightning Arrow. Obiettivamente, questa lega, League Start di Lightning Arrow, era la cosa più forte che si poteva fare. Perché è forte dal livello 1 o 12, non mi ricordo quando si prende, a livello 100 con, non lo so, a 3-4 mirror è più forte Tornado Shot. Ma con un mirror, secondo me, se la giocano, eh. Cioè, puoi ottenere circa gli stessi risultati. Quindi vuol dire che, cioè, praticamente tu prendi una skill all'atto 1 e te la porti fino a quando hai un mirror. Chi cazzo ci arriva ad avere un mirror? Non hai capito? Ma porco Giuda! No, vabbè.
So, this does raise a question you haven't had to deal with before, where you've removed a mechanic now that has a premium tab that people have purchased. What is the plan for
questo
that?
lo chiedevo anch'io. Avete tolto Metamorph, però io ho il tab dei Catalyst. E loro adesso gli diranno, ma coglione, abbiamo tolto Metamorph. Però i Catalyst ci sono ancora. Però la parte sotto...
So that tab, so due to Catalyst moving to Ultimatum and there being the inscribed ultimatums, that tab is just immediately converted to an ultimatum tab.
Ci si mette dentro gli Scribe Ultimatum. Ecco cosa c'è dalla
I
parte
think there's
sotto.
60 slots for inscribed ultimatums in there as well. So
Onesto,
you don't need to buy a
onesto.
new one, it'll automatically transfer over.
Perfect. Sounds great. All right. Let me just see if there's any other ultimatum questions. With Metamorph out of the game, will there be another master hideout NPC to replace Tane?
Ci sarà un NPC
Not currently, no.
All right.
per Tane? Perché Tane aveva una qualità, che pochi sanno. Tane lo sblocchi molto presto negli atti. E se vorrei proprio fare un power leveling potentissimo e magari non sei in Europa ma c'hai caricamenti molto lenti, tu potevi nel tuo hideout, andare nell'hideout, vendere le cose a Tane e da lì trasferirti nel punto della mappa che ti serviva, tipo nell'atto 4 e no, nell'atto 9, nell'atto 10, scusate, quello che siete sulla barca col ponte che è lunghissimo attraversare il paese. Se hai sbloccato Tane risparmi, non so, 1 minuto, 2 minuti, non è che risparmi tanto, però se sei uno di quelli che rannano, poteva essere una strategia. Però niente, non gli ha messo nessuno al posto di Tane, quindi questa salta.
Can ultimatum be blocked on the Atlas passive tree so that it doesn't appear?
Anche l'atto 3 è stessa cosa. L'atto 3 è quelli che vivono in America, in certi posti o in Australia. Non è che si fanno la strada come noi infami che camminiamo. Loro vanno nell'hideout e si spostano dove devono spostarsi. Ah no, però no, non me lo ricordo. No, solo una volta serve sta roba. Vabbè.
Yes, it can. The same node that blocks Metamorph has been changed to a new node that blocks Ultimatum.
All right. Cool. We have a bunch of questions about transfigured gems.
Non abbiamo nessuno posto di Tane, ma qualcuno arriverà.
Questions about it too, I can tell.
Arriverà quella del Sanctum prima o poi.
Transfigured gem system's kind of a big deal. Is this replacing Labyrinth?
È vero, ci sono le Transfigured Gem. Saranno nel Valaria?
Enchantments, alternate qualities, and threshold jewels entirely.
Short answer, yes. It is replacing it. Belt enchants are gone, boot enchants are gone, etc. Which I like in the sense that it reopens, because those were very old designs. I mean,
Non ci sono più le Val Gem.
but it
Non
does free up a
esistono.
lot of design space to use in the future, and with a lot of the changes to quality and what the
Ha detto solo che non ci sono più gli enchant nel
loss is
labirinto.
ultimately inconsequential. So yeah, they're gone.
E le Val Gem?
Deal with it.
Io sono contento che non ci siano più gli enchant. Perché... Cioè, era uno sbattimento assurdo. L'ultima volta che mi è servito un enchant, che mi sarebbe servito, mi costava 19 divine per farmi enchantare Rip, e il tipo mi fa, guarda, ne ho già 4 o 5 in coda, quindi ci vogliono almeno 3 giorni. e non c'era nessun altro che lo faceva in quel momento. E quindi, cioè, io devo dargli il mio elmo corrotto, che mi serve per giocare, per 3 giorni, spendere 20 divine, e no! Cioè, ho detto no! Poi me la son cavata in qualche modo, ne ho forse comprato uno di qualcun altro che l'aveva fatto, e l'ho pagato molto meno, ma no, era tediosissimo.
All right. Are there multiple different transfigurations for each skill, or is there one for each? It seems like so many new gems, effectively.
So, I mean, we're still cranking them out. Like, we're not going to stop until there's a cutoff, effectively, and then we'll probably add them later if we still feel like we have to.
Sì, il lab andrebbe fatto. Andrebbe fatto perché ci sono tanti di quei soldi da fare nel lab, che è una roba pazzesca.
But we're aiming for one per primary damaging skill minimum.
Ok, ce
But
n'è
two
una
up
per
to.
ogni
So it's
damaging
1 to
skill
2 per
minimo.
skill, but auras don't get them, heralds don't get them, utility stuff don't. We're really focusing on your main skills that you would primarily normally 6 link and whatnot. I mean, I know you can do higher link herald builds, but you know.
That limited
Almeno di
damage
quelle che
skill
si usano di
makes a
solito,
fantastic
cioè magari
system
Siphon Trap,
expansion. If
no?
it's a popular system, we can make many and many in the future.
Yeah.
It allows us to so there's this thing where like cleave is cleave, and you could change cleave to something. You could change cleave, but now you're ruining just the kind of like simple thing it is at level 2. You get it at the game, you just want to cleave stuff. So
Sono
overcomplicating
forse
that
156
to
gemme,
try and make it more interesting and new is
di più?
honestly not the
Boh.
right answer, and it's kind of a thing that's happened to a lot of skills. So now with this alternate gem system, we get to take those ideas that people have of like how we can be transformative with something like cleave, and we get to just add that skill gem without having to compromise that early game experience. And that I think is very, very valuable. And it's, I mean,
Ok, quindi queste, a differenza del Val, migliorano l'early game. Scusate. Perché le Val avevano il difetto che non facevi in tempo a caricarle, che arrivavi nell'altra area, alcune almeno, all'inizio, e quindi praticamente non le usavi per un bel
the
po'.
possibilities are endless, as I guess I could say, right? Like,
So, how do you be transformative with something like Cleave? I'm curious. How do you approach that?
well, I don't know. Like, I can either talk about what we've actually done or talk about what we could do.
Both.
I mean, something is you could. Well, actually, what
La gente che arrivava a Storyville con aspettative basse, dice, si concentrano solo su prima di... Sì. Ti fanno la cazzo di lega, meccanica di lega più bella al mondo con Calandra, Sentinel, l'altro non mi ricordo mai come si chiama, quello della Forge dei Titan, come cazzo si chiama? Cioè, tutte insieme, le metti in una cosa sola, e più, posso tradare, cioè, ho le ascendancy nelle ascendancy, ho i cluster jewel nelle ascendancy delle ascendancy, è bellissima sta cosa.
have done. I think what we've done with it, and
Ok, cosa hanno fatto con
details that I might
Cleave?
be wrong on, or something that might have changed, but we'll just get into it. I think right now you have to be using a sword and an axe, so 2 different weapons, which is interesting. I believe it also scales. I think it
Devi
generates
usare una
rage and
spada o
scales
un'ascia?
AOE based on rage. So it's kind of like
Scala
when you
OI
build. So
sulla rage.
it's worth noting, like that might sound more niche, and that is the point. That the alternate gems, or the transfigured gems, are
Sì, è più
generally
di
more
nicchia,
niche.
ok, va bene.
But the power opportunity is much higher as a result
Ma
of
fa
that.
più danno, va
They
bene.
will scale
Quindi
more easier and
adesso
easier,
i
and
pro
it will
che
save us
vanno
the
più
damage of just
veloci
having this extreme
perché c'è la
power
master che ti
curve
dà
of
attack
damage on
speed se hai
body
un'ascia e
damage
una
to
spada,
make it do an obscene
useranno
amount of
cleave perché
damage
cleave fa più danno. L'hanno fatto apposta per far usare i pro cleave
I think we've
e
just
farla
got them
sembrare una
designed
bella
right
skill.
now. We experimented with a few others. I think there's one with them pale, but I think we've gone with that on double strike now. And
Allora,
there's
io
some
comunque
stuff
sono
with,
gasatissimo, devo andare a letto, sono
bleeding, but it's
gasatissimo,
gone on something.
non dormirò un cazzo
So many.
stanotte, adesso
There's
passerò da
hundreds of
qua
these
fino
things,
alla
and
di
we've gone
mattina a
through
guardarmi le
so
reaction
bunch of
di
iterations
tutti.
that forgive my memory a little bit.
Porco Giuda.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there for sure.
How does this affect Val gems? Do these new versions have Val versions or only the originals?
These new well, technically the way it is work now is just you can
Okay.
have a Val alternate cleave, and that just grants Val cleave, but it doesn't have the same mechanic, so it won't
Right.
have the rage thing. It like technically the Val skill is a separate ability, and so
Ok, le Val
yes, it
sono
can be
separate.
corrupted to grant that extra ability, but it doesn't have the same properties. No.
Gotcha. Yeah. So are they always going to be just strictly better? Because that's just that Cleave version sounds better than regular Cleave.
Ma quindi, cioè, Non sono le varie. Questi praticamente hanno creato, o stanno creando, vogliono creare, cioè, vogliono raddoppiare le skill attive prendendo come base delle skill già fatte. Stan facendo tipo coi replica unique. Nel senso, stan creando delle cose totalmente nuove, ma con come base cose già fatte, così possono riutilizzare le animazioni probabilmente. Ed è una roba pazzesca. Cioè, io non ho idea di quante ne abbiano già fatte, ma sono tantissime. Cioè, se ce l'abbiamo anche nelle prossime 2-3 leghe, va bene. Sono tantissime. C'è una skill che ti piace, ma non ti convince del tutto? Bam! Cioè, Madonna! Come esce settimana prossima? Settimana prossima esce la Lega, non può uscire la lista delle skill. Io devo saperla prima, impazzisco.
Or is it
No.
sometimes going to be they're just quite different?
It's strictly better if you embrace the niche. Yes.
Right.
If you are investing in rage and specking into and using the sword and
È vero che i tatuaggi li hanno aggiunti dopo, quelli più fighi poi, cazzo. Oh, beh, ci sta, ci sta. Se mi mettono skill lega in corso, non mi dispiacerebbe. Tanto non credo di startare con qualcosa di nuovo, a meno che mi esce una roba strafiga tipo RIP, Summon RIP. A cagare, per fortuna non l'ho league startata, ma era il mio sogno. Perché ho league startato con Exsanguinate, che non è brutta come skill, ma non sapevo usarla e quindi ho league startato malissimo. No, non lo so, non me lo ricordo. Ho league startato. Vabbè, non importa. Comunque league starto con cose che vado sul sicuro.
axe, then yes, of course, it's better.
I mean, you can't exactly say that the one that has zombies falling from the sky is strictly better, right? It's just a totally
That's
different. It's just a totally
I
different.
mean,
Quella degli zombie che cadono dal cielo è una figata.
it looked pretty awesome.
It does depend on your definition of better, of course, but I'm talking about just like raw clear speed or raw, boss killing speed. Yes, from that measure, like especially with respect to the low level skills, that is often going to be the case if you embrace that build and that kind of more niche build. But yes, again,
More
there
niche
are
perché off
things
meta
that
non
are
lo può
always
dire,
hard to
credo.
compare, like the Frostbomb is a good
Deve
example.
stare molto attento a quello che dice. Off, off. More niche.
It's now a clearing skill as opposed.
È finito? Ce n'è un altro? È finito così.
Yeah, awesome stuff.
Questo dura 3 ore uno. Questo
Thanks very
dura
much for watching, folks.
2 ore e 36. Minchia, manca ancora mezz'ora.
Clearing skill as opposed to a more utility focused skill, not
Yep.
having the cooldown, for example. So they fill a lot of them fill different roles, and so
Chris
they can't
Wilson è
really be compared
zittissimo.
one to one. But yeah,
I mean, it's definitely going to shift the meta a lot. Like, just because there's going to be, like, there's a lot
Cioè,
of
si è
new stuff
proprio
to try.
tirato fuori da queste cose. Prima era lui che faceva
it's shifting it
tutto.
enough
E
that
sta,
if
no,
people were to
ragazzi,
ask
dai,
me
ve lo
what
lascio
I'm
fare
going
un
to
po'
play with,
voi.
I actually genuinely have no idea. I honestly am. I don't know. I'll find out in the last day probably. But
Is this something you might explore with utility skills or support gems,
Che
things
da un
like that
lato
as
ci
well
sta, sono
in the future?
3
I don't know.
fondatori,
I'll
però
find out in the last day probably. But
Is this something you might explore with utility skills or support gems, things like that as well in the future?
It's a big maybe.
Yep.
Support gems. Haven't really thought about a support gem case. I
The
mean,
thing with support gems is you can just add more support gems and you don't need to
Yeah.
worry about modifying the
You
ma è
existing
un
skills.
so may
grande
as well just
Chris,
add
cazzo.
more.
Yeah, yeah.
Cioè,
Alternate
avercela,
emeralds. It can be done in some cases. Yes, it can. be.
avercela le palle che c'ha lui, cazzo.
But we'll see whether or not it finds need for it. It's just in those cases, it's like it goes from giving buff A to buff B, like doing it with an aura. Like
È solo che secondo me, cioè, è talmente un figo lui che, cioè, tutti dicono GGG Chris Wilson, gli altri dicono ci siamo anche noi, vogliamo un po' di spazio. Dai Chris, per favore, facci fare un annuncio anche a noi.
you'd have to do something
Cioè,
very wildly different to make it really transformative. Otherwise, you're going from just giving a certain stat to giving another stat, and that's not really what it's about.
What does this mean for heist in terms of it losing one of its big
come
rewards,
facessero
but
fare
also,
cosa?
like specific heists that were gem type heists and whatnot?
So the way, well,
Ah, quello
how that
sì.
works now is
Cioè, anche il fatto che veramente adesso proprio gratis se vuoi giocare tanto non lo è. Perché, cioè, se vuoi giocare tanto un paio di stash ti servono, ma con 30 euro hai tutto quello che ti serve e ogni 3 mesi ti mettono, cioè, Affliction, ti mettono sta roba. Cioè, sì, stanno aspettando 2 leghe e te lo vendono. Te lo vendono a tipo 60 euro per 2 stash.
that every single tile set just can. So the rewards are no longer bound to the, or the, I should say, the rewards from the display cases at the end.
Yeah.
At the end of the blueprints are no longer bound to the tile set of the, or the base item type of the.
Cosa?
So the way, well, how that works now is that every single tile set just can. So the rewards are no longer bound to buff B.
Stai chiedendo
Like
di
to do it
Heist?
with a
Perché io volevo
like you have to
startare
do
Heist
something
questa
very
lega,
wildly
poi è uscito
different to make
ultimato,
it
però
really transformative. Otherwise, you're going from, you know, just giving a certain stat to giving another stat, and that's not really what it's about.
Yeah.
What does this mean for heist in terms of it losing one of its big
Heist,
rewards,
non
but
Heist.
also like specific heists that were gem type heists and whatnot?
So the way, well, how that works now is that every single tile set just can. So the rewards are no longer bound to the, or the, I should say, the rewards from the display cases at the end.
Yeah.
At the end of the blueprints are no longer bound to the tile set of the, or the base item type of the blueprint. So, which I, yeah. So you can get kind of any of the rewards. You can get replicas from any of them. You can get alternate base types from any of them, or experimented base types, and you can get well, now currency. One thing we did do is buff the currency. Like we did certainly obviously acknowledge losing the gems removes some of the value from running heist, quite a lot of it. So we buffed the currency just to make it better. So when you do get to the end, you have less like miss cases where you just get like 2 chance orbs. It's like that from completing a blueprint, that's just like completely insufficient. We have added new focusing, trying to make chase ones, but as it's pretty hard to reliably make chase uniques.
Io ho paura di Sanctum. Volevo fare Heist anziché Sanctum perché, prima di tutto, secondo me, chiunque farà Sanctum. Che vabbè, ti dà currency pura, quindi quello vale sempre. Però il rischio è che i tomi questa volta costeranno. Almeno le stars costeranno abbastanza. Poi magari lo nerfano un pochino, non tanto, ma gli tolgono un po' di cose, così di qua e di là, e va a finire che cioè vale la pena, ma Heist, io tanto che non faccio Heist, forse dalla 3.18 che non faccio un Heist, e non mi dispiacerebbe, nel senso fare una settimanella di Heist, tirar su un Headhunter, una Mageball, cioè non sarebbe male comunque. Mi faccio il mio Toxic Rain, vado a 500 di movement speed o a 600, faccio un Heist in 20 secondi. Solo che se poi nei blueprint adesso non posso più fare i blueprint quelli fighi, non mi fido troppo a fare una meccanica del genere, perché i soldi erano sui blueprint e su quelli delle gemme erano. All of the Dead io spero anch'io che lo rimettano, perché allora non mi piace particolarmente, ma è come Ice, sono quelle cose che dici ogni 5-6 leghe, boh, me lo sparo volentieri, cioè poi davvero è fatto, è pronto, non è bellissimo, ma puoi anche non metterci lavoro, devi un pochino sistemare i reward, perché non ci sono più i tattoo e non... e quindi ma pagavano i tattoo li hai tolti, hai risolto il problema, devi fare in modo che il guadagno sia quello, non ti richiede tantissimo, poi sì, potresti sistemare tutte le unità e farlo perfetto, però non è che stiamo giocando a LoL, cioè, o a TFT, stiamo giocando a POE, anche se ste robe... Eh sì, ma anche quello non ci sono più, le Nekoros Lock non le trovi più, e ci metteranno i mirror, ci metteranno. 4 righe. Minchia. C'è gente che che fa currency su POE in una maniera che io posso solo sognarmi. Cioè, io avrò fatto un mirror questa lega, tra tutto, avrò fatto 600-700 divine, una roba del genere. Cioè... 4000 in Coroslock è... Boh. Andiamo avanti, va che devo andare a letto.
Players kind of ultimately control what that is. But we've tried to add more powerful ones. We have rebalanced a number of replica
Hai fatto 6000 tota sta lega. Minchia.
uniques, and we've rebalanced a lot of
Li
experimented
avrà
base types,
comprati.
including trying to emphasize that the jewelry, the amulets, and the rings have some very, very powerful alternatives. Honestly, they're probably probably the best amulet you can get now is an experimented base type amulet. But obviously, they're pretty hard to find.
E quello sì, con Wespira era...
And you'd have to craft it, of course.
It's
Era
5
easy.
new replica uniques, I believe.
Però ecco, stiamo parlando di Heist e Heist... Niente, l'ho tolto dalle mie... Avrei voluto kickstartare Heist. È una settimana che ci penso, sto guardando
safe to
tutti i
say
video.
Heist will be something you'll be keeping a close eye on then to make sure that the rewards are up to
questa
par
roba
now
qua
after this removal.
I hope so for sure. I mean, me personally, I'm just excited about those experimented base type amulets and rings. Like before, we had the -1 prefix, +1 suffix, and now you've got like -3 prefix, +3 suffix, and -3 suffix, +3. You know, the invert of that, and like it's like, what kind of ring can you make when you've got
Sei
you know, 6
fissi su un
prefixes?
anello.
Is that better? Is that worse? Or like 6 suffixes, and then there's like ones that reduce the amount of prefixes but increase the potency of suffixes and stuff like that. And so
Stop hearing about this, Mark.
yeah,
I'm like, geez.
That facial expression as well whenever.
It's like, you sure about this?
Yeah.
Jonathan and I have seen the code to handle
Comunque è
this stuff,
bello
so we're
vedere
both
come
like,
si
"Ooh,
divertono
how
loro a
is
fare
this?"
sta roba. Cioè, li vedi proprio che sono lì tre cazzoni che vogliono sparare a minchiate. Cioè uno parla, ma sì, e poi facciamo due sputtanate di qua, due di là.
So good.
there's
È
always
bello vederli così che
so
si
much
divertono.
going on that it is nearly
Non si
impossible for
prendono sul
everyone to know.
serio.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So people are obviously pretty excited about the transfigured gems. They do look quite exciting, and that's a lot of effectively new skills for us to play with. But it does kind of raise the question about one of the more controversial decisions with this change is that, well, the labyrinth, it has fairly different gameplay than most of Path of Exile. It's got like a lot of environmental hazards and traps and puzzles and
Gli
a
chiede se vogliono
labyrinthian
togliere il
layout.
labirinto.
And naturally, that's not exactly super wildly popular content for people to run. Not everyone wants to play that. So can you tell me about the decision to make Transfigured Gems specifically a reward for Labyrinth, especially since it looks like something that you'll want to run a lot to get more of them?
Well,
Well, we like labyrinths, so...
a few things to talk about here. I mean, the labyrinth is...
Ah, comunque gli ha chiesto se... Gli fa, ma il labirinto non piace tanto alla gente. Come mai la cosa di mettere il reward di queste nuove gemme nel labirinto? Esatto, cioè, ma proprio nel labirinto dovete metterle. No, ma a noi il labirinto piace, cioè l'idea che Zarro sia sto figaccione che ti crea il labirinto e ti dice a challenger an emperor's must cosa the promises, adesso non me ne ricordo perché è un po' che non gioco, però cioè è figo il labirinto come idea, però gli sta dicendo oh, il labirinto ve lo tenete, cazzo.
You know, I understand. I understand how some people feel about it and people don't. But one thing is, it is core content that you do run through the campaign and you do to ascend. And we wanted it to...
Cioè, capito? Gli stava dicendo, ma non è che potevate togliere il labirinto? E questo... Ma no, perché il labirinto è core content che tu devi runnare nella campagna e quindi te lo tieni.
be that the transfigured gem system is accessible there, as opposed to like say where alternate qualities were in Heist, even though there was a kind of soft mandatory nature of having alternate qualities. It's like, well, you know, it was the same problem. I don't want to run Heist, let's say in a given league, or someone does and someone doesn't, and so you have to trade for them. And so for that case, it's the exact same thing, right? You can trade for these transfigured gems, of course. But we've done two things as well. So obviously when you get to the end of it, you put your gem in, you can pick from the one of three outcomes. It maintains its level and its.
Però in effetti è una figata sta cosa, cioè perché io potrei prendere... Io so quando vado a fare il labirinto che voglio giocare tot gemma, la gioco dopo il livello... Lo faccio dopo il livello 31, quindi all'arpeggio consiglioso ho accesso a tutte le gemme, quindi già al primo labirinto dovrei avere la possibilità di ottenere la gemma che mi interessa. Mal che vada al secondo, al terzo, alla peggio, però è carina sta cosa che, come praticamente ti dico, dentro la fine della campagna c'è la val skill che vuoi. Cioè, figata. Se me la dicessero così una val skill io sarei contento. Dici, tanto questo devi farlo 3 volte. Se c'è la possibilità che ti esce, trasforma quella skill che metti in una skill come alternativa, non mi viene in mente come l'hanno chiamata, è carino, eh. Cioè, sta roba qua... Beh, c'era l'opzione nel labirinto, c'era proprio l'opzione che ti diceva... Cazzo, ho paura a tornare indietro. Cosa siamo? 2,42. C'era l'opzione nel labirinto che ti diceva trasforma la tua skill in una skill di quelle figaccione. Non è figaccione perché non mi viene in mente come si chiama. Ma chi se lo ricorda? Qua stanno facendo... Vabbè, c'era, l'ho vista. Giuro che l'ho vista. No, questa è già sta roba.
Quality,
Comunque c'era.
as to what you put in, so the skill doesn't just become worse, at least in that regard. But sometimes there is an option that will transform it directly into its transfigured counterpart.
Ah, vedi che lo
Which
dice,
means
certe
if you
volte
don't
c'è
want to,
quella che
like,
ti trasforma
take the
direttamente.
gamble and just keep trying to pick random ones, you can wait for that and convert your, say, Firestorm directly into a transfigured Firestorm. So that at least will make that a bit easier. But yeah, ultimately, I wanted it to be somewhere where it was introduced early enough, around level 30 is about right. So you're not like, waiting until end game before you can get these. Like a player can experience these through the campaign, get a feel for them, get used to them, and level them up instead of getting to end game and then completely changing their entire build. Like it being early enough, and Labyrinth is around the point where that is like, a good place to commit to that. And also, you're already doing it for your ascendancy, so it's a good way to
Ci sta
introduce the
come
mechanic
cosa.
to
Dice, a differenza delle Val che
players, as
tu porti
opposed to
al
just
20
kind
la tua
of
gemma e poi
putting it
provi a
somewhere a little
valarla.
bit random and a little bit hidden.
Questo lo fai durante la campagna.
That's the
Figa come cosa.
primary motivation.
Path of Exile has a lot of content that is going to vary depending on player taste. Some people like delve, some people don't, and that content has specific rewards, and those rewards are almost always tradable. And so in this case, if you want one of the gems, you can also trade for it if you don't like Labyrinth.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm interested in that idea of like players running into it as a course of their regular gameplay. Does that mean there's a pretty good likelihood then that each time you run like normal crawl and merciless labyrinth and whatnot for the first time, and say you only do them those once times, that you're going to actually get a pretty relevant gem reward upgrade each run?
The option is always there. So one of the crafts on the bench is always to convert it to a transfigured gem. So it's not like that one's random.
Questo era...
Whether or not
Ok,
you'll
vedi.
get the one you exactly...
Uno dei craft che c'è sempre è convertire la gemma che gli metti in una di quelle trasfigurate. Quindi quello c'è sempre, non è a scienza. Il resto, se non vuoi una figa, allora lì è...
want obviously isn't reliable, but you will always get... so if you put in the common one that's put there is if you put in an int gem, you will get a transfigured int gem back. So at least it's likely if you put in a spell, you'll get a spell. And if you don't want
cazzo,
to
no,
take
no,
it,
non
you
è
can
vero
just be like,
quello
no,
che
I
ho
don't
appena
want it,
detto.
and take your gem back, and then try again next time. So it doesn't like
Va, culo.
force you to. So you can put your primary skill in there, hoping for the best, and if you don't get it, you take it back, and then just keep playing your
Sai
build.
quanto costerà
Or
il
you
Gift
run it
of the
again if you
Goddess
want,
questo
or you can
giro?
wait till crawl and run it.
Io
And it is
ne
worth
vendevo
noting
un
that,
sacco.
let's say I know this is a bit later in the game, but the Uber Labyrinth has 2 crafts by default instead of 1 now. So when you get to the end, you get a few more opportunities at doing it, and that's like one tactic could be knowing that the easiest labyrinth is the shortest and easiest to get through, obviously being lower level and shorter. You can, at like a high level player, could just go and run that a number of times just to try and get the right transfigured gem. But obviously you won't get a lot of the good crafts and a lot of the good rewards that also come from it. But if that was your way to try and get your most appropriate transfigured gem the fastest, like that is a tactic you could do. So it's not really meant to be ultra taxing and time consuming to try and get the one you want. But again, as
Sì, sta
said,
dicendo che è relativamente facile ottenere quella che vuoi anche
Right.
senza trade. Però
That
ecco,
sounds like,
potrebbe sì,
from a reward
richiederti
perspective, that's
mezz'ora,
quite good for both
mezz'ora
lab
di
runners and
tempo
also people just
e
doing it just the once as
penso
they
che sia un
go
buon
through.
andare.
So I like the reward sounds of that, but are there any planned changes to running the labyrinth itself or making the labyrinth better in the future?
Contando che il labirinto lo fa
We
in
went
5
over that
minuti.
a lot. And as a simple, again, going back to like we think of it like this: we could have done that, or we could have added ultimatum. It's a resourcing problem. Not to say that
Also, people just doing it just the once as they. That sounds like, from a reward perspective, that it's quite good for both lab runners and also people just doing it just the once as they go through. So I like the reward sounds of that, but are there any planned changes to running the labyrinth itself or making the labyrinth better in the future?
We went over that a lot.
Cioè, no, ma non potete togliere il labirinto. Lui fa bene, questione di risorse. Cioè, potevamo fare quello o potevamo mettere ultimatum. Quindi vi abbiamo messo quello che volete, non cagate il cazzo.
And as a simple, again, going back to like we think of it like this: we could have done that, or we could have added ultimatum. It's a resourcing problem. Not to say those are the two options, but what I'm saying is that it is very what it needs is a lot of love, and we need the time to do it. So yes, we had a massive list of changes of things we wanted to do, and we just couldn't find the time to do it. So it is something I definitely would love to do later for sure. Because
all right, next league, guys. Good, nice, cool. Sounds good.
No, gli ho proprio fatto no con la testa, no. Cazzo. Guarda.
Later for sure.
Guarda che lui parla.
Next
Guarda lui.
league, guys. Good, nice, cool.
No, gli ho proprio fatto no, inculati.
I said it for you. Will we get to see all the gems before
Con
launch?
POE 2 non avremo più
It is our
l'ultimatum,
intention to start
il
posting them
trial.
as we're still churning through them. I think our plan is to start posting, like we'll do a series of posts. I could be wrong. The community team can correct me at some point, but I think it's to do a series of posts, and as we then make more, we'll just do more posts and just keep adding them until the last very possible moment.
It's worth mentioning with this kind of content, because it's so parallel and because so many, like, every gem is optional because there are so many possibilities. We just start 200, and then the ones that are finished get released, and the other ones get released later or scrapped, and we don't know what the set is going to be currently, and we're just going to keep going till the last minute getting these in. And
Quindi continuano a farne finché c'è tempo, le nuove gemme, e all'ultima le buttano fuori. Quel che c'è.
I think the enchants remain. Alt quality gems, I do believe all of this will be in the patch notes after this, so I
I vecchi enchant rimangono. Cazzo, devo farmi
I
inchantare
do believe
un paio
alt
di cose.
quality gems just get converted to regular quality, retaining the value.
The quality, the quality that is now different because we've changed.
Oh yeah, well that's it's worth noting that the quality on every or almost every single gem, I think the word quality appears 314 times in the patch notes. I believe is what it is.
Cioè, ma che quante cazzo... Io ho paura a vedere le patch notes. Cioè, c'è la Divina Commedia su ste patch notes. Porco Giuda. Io non vivo più, ragazzi.
So instead of like just a lot of
finito il mio
20%
periodo.
increased damage or 10% increased attack speed, we're trying
Io
to really
sto
look
cominciando ad avere delle interazioni sociali con della gente di fuori. Stavo cominciando a camminare al pomeriggio a prendere un po' di sole.
We're adding like +1 or
Non ci
2
credo.
seconds, you know, like, or +0.1 per quality kind of thing. So it's meant to be more multiplicative as opposed to increases, because there were skills where obviously
Sono
the increase
felice
more of the
che la
increase you
Lega
have on
sia
the
figa,
passive tree,
ma...
the worse the quality becomes, or vice versa. So yeah, but this is, I think, changed with a lot of the base skills as well, mind you. I think discharge in particular is one where it's like it has increased area of effect per charge consumed, where that obviously could get to a massive amount of increased area of effect, which means if you're playing that build, then investing into like a 10% increased area of effect node on the tree is ultimately doing nothing. Like you're going from 200% increase to 210, like it kind of doesn't really matter. But now, so that's been changed to be multiplicative as well. So as we've gone through and done this qualities, we've tried to do that on a lot more gems to make the gem.
Sembra che, da come ne parlano, sembra che i ruoli che hanno fatto sono abbastanza intelligenti.
Multiplying that as opposed to adding with those stats. which does yield a fairly large amount more power for a lot of these skills.
That sounds like a
Quindi le
quality
skill
change.
sono più potenti, cioè stanno facendo,
Sorry, couldn't help.
stanno davvero facendo
We are just
Expedition al
we're
contrario.
over time, but just a couple more questions before we finish up today. So in
Mica
the
che
past, it was
overtime,
pretty
doveva
typical for
durare
expansions to
un'ora.
come packaged with some
Alle
pretty
11
substantial
ho
changes
iniziato,
to
sono
skill
20 alle 2.
balance. Obviously, we're getting like a ton of overtime, but just a couple more questions before we finish up today. So in the past, it was pretty typical for expansions to come packaged with some pretty substantial changes to skill balance. Obviously, we're getting like a ton of new skills. That's obviously affecting like skill meta and whatnot. But the last few leagues haven't really had much in the way of skill balance, and we're finding like player expectations there. And is that something that you're continuing to like not do, or any thoughts about that?
Again, a lot of it comes down to honestly time, but for this one,
Ok,
I
mi
really
sono
wanted to
perso,
do
non ho,
something
non
that
ho
wasn't just
ascoltato
playing that
niente di quello
almost
che ha detto.
cat and
Stavo
mouse game
pensando
of like
a Chris
upskill
Wilson
A
al corpo
and
di
then next week
ricerca.
upskill B to be comparable, and then maybe it
Quindi
goes too
spero
fast, and then you
che sia una
upskill
domanda
A again.
stupida.
And if you don't do that, it's just nerf central, right? So where we do that for some extreme cases where we bring them down, I wanted to do something that really wasn't just let's up cleave by 10% and something else by 10%.
Wow,
And
cos'è sta
again, I
roba?
don't want to add mechanical complexity to a lot of skills, especially early, because it just makes them
Perché
more
stanno succedendo
convoluted and
delle cose?
confusing.
Non so cosa sta succedendo.
So
Ciao
this
Mordred,
was
è
a
stato un
system that allowed us
piacere.
to not play
Buonanotte,
that
a dormire a
game,
me o te.
but yet
Io cerco di
add
vedermi alla
thousands
fine
and
sta
thousands
roba.
or millions.
Ricordati di prendere il drop delle ali prima di andare a letto. Ah, grazie per il follow. Dovevo fare un suono, perché non l'ho fatto? Vabbè, non lo so perché non ho fatto un suono, però grazie per il follow. Belli fuochi d'artificio. Ricordati le ali. Sono brutte, ma sono gratis.
Millions of possible permutations, and we're going to be less hesitant, given time resources, less hesitant to change the balance and change alternate gems or add new ones. So it's given us a system that
Non
allows
ho
us to do
capito
future
niente
balance
di
a
questa
lot
domanda, raga,
quicker.
devo riscoltarla perché non ho davvero
Tried to
capito
do that.
nulla di quello che gli ha chiesto.
I think the enchants remain. Makes them
No,
more
sono tornato.
convoluted and confusing. It wasn't just
Continuing to like not do, or any thoughts about that? Skill balance and skill balance. Obviously, we're getting like a ton of new skills. That's obviously affecting like skill meta and whatnot. But the last few leagues haven't really had much in the way of skill balance, and we're finding like
Ah, ok, sta
player
chiedendo skill
expectations
balance.
there. And is that something that you're continuing to like not do, or any thoughts about that?
Again, a lot of it comes down to honestly time, but for this one, I really wanted to do something that wasn't just playing that almost cat and mouse game of like ups.
Ah, ho capito cosa è successo. Cioè, c'ho l'alert su POE, su questo coso, ma non c'ho l'alert su questo. Ok, devo metterlo su tutti. Sì, vabbè. Dettaglio, in genere gioco su POE, non gioco su... Cioè, vabbè, ci siamo capiti.
Skill A and then next league upskill B to be comparable, and then maybe it goes too fast, so then you upskill A again. And if you don't do that, it's just nerf central, right? So where we do that for some extreme cases where we bring them down, I wanted to do something that really wasn't just let's up cleave by 10% and something else by 10%. And
Che mi sta
again,
diventando
noting I
sempre
don't
più
want to add
simpatico. Sta dicendo che
mechanical
vuole
complexity to a lot of
pareggiare le
skills,
skill
especially early,
buffandole e non
because it just makes them
nerfandole.
more convoluted and confusing. So this was a system that allowed us to not play that game, but yet add thousands and thousands or millions of possible permutations. And we're going to be less hesitant, given time resources, less hesitant to change the balance and change alternate gems or add new ones. So it's given us a system that allows us to
Dicono
do
che
future
non
balance a
faranno...
lot,
Cioè,
without compromising kind of that core game and that new player experience at all.
dicono che sono un po'
There's
più,
also,
saranno un
like,
po' più
the
libertini
quality changes are a
nel
pretty
buffare e
huge thing
nerfare
about
le
changing
skill,
existing
tipo.
skills. Like that's a big,
Oh no,
big
that
thing.
is
That is a big thing.
for sure, and
Yeah,
and a number of skills have changed. Like what we've done is simplified some base skills, because we have, and then what we've done is taken what they were doing. So an example of something we're trying to.
Comunque stavo pensando, cioè, era difficile ricordarsi tutte le skill di POE. Già tutte, io tipo quelle con l'arco non me le ricordo, le altre me le ricordo. Ci metti la versione Val, diventa abbastanza impegnativa. Adesso, cioè, tutte vengono raddoppiate, ma porco Giuda! Cioè, non basta un PhD, una laurea in POE adesso, ne servono due. Madonna.
I don't actually know if we've done this because so maybe not. I know I probably shouldn't mention things like this, but for example, you get ethereal knives, and it's got all this talk about lingering blades going on.
Ethereal Knife è stata la mia prima skill super prefe, mega prefe. Vediamo come va.
Yeah, most people who play the game into advanced know what lingering blades are, but like a new player is not going to know that at all. So ideally we return EK to its former glory of what it was, and then we add an alternate gem that's really emphasizing that lingering blades mechanic and benefiting from that.
Grazie, sì.
Whatever,
sì, che io questa lega mi faccio un aura stacker con Ethereal Knife, spacco il mondo, dai. Cazzo, che è il mio sogno da quando ho cominciato a giocare, non ho mai avuto abbastanza soldi per
alternate
farlo.
gems we want to. So it's allowing us to restore some of those, especially lower level gems, to their simplest forms, as what they should be, and then also give them a rebalance. I think often it's resulting in them being a little bit stronger early, which is going to change a little bit. But I like the resultant a lot better, where you're not getting overwhelmed with this kind of almost unnecessary information early, and then you get this alternate gem that's really emphasizing that mechanic more. If you then go down that path, you can become even stronger than it ever
devo andare a
was.
dormire.
If a player is
Mi hanno buffato anche Ethereal Knife. Adesso devono solo buffarmi il Sion. Io godo, cioè godo.
For a number of leagues in a row.
Cosa, Chris?
If a player is approaching the feedback of there need to be balance changes based on the fact that they feel there's some staleness in the metagame, if they feel they're playing the same kind of pool of builds for a number of leagues in a row, then the transfigured gem stuff will have fixed that, right? Like every build is now affected by there being multiple different versions of the skill available.
For sure.
There will be, it is going to look entirely different. And it's worth noting, transfigured gems came from me sitting down with Mark and saying the players have an expectation for significant balance changes. The problem is we can't really do any. We've hit the point of like having to make the skills more complicated. What can we do? And Mark suggested transfigured gems, which, as Jonathan Blow would say, there was immediately tons of gold on the ground to pick up with that design thing, right? You know, it's so much cool stuff we can do, and absolutely is going to affect every build in the game.
Great.
Non avevamo voglia di... Scusa. No, perché mi sono seduto con Marco e mi ha detto, oh, la gente si aspetta che facciamo un balance chain. Non riusciamo, non possiamo farlo, non abbiamo tempo, non abbiamo voglia. Cosa facciamo? Oh, trasmutiamo tutte le gemme. Ma porco Giuda. Funziona in effetti, perché adesso ogni gemma ha le sue varianti. Però... Scusate. Però cazzo, dai.
Talking about ascendancy changes, last league Chieftain underwent a pretty big overhaul, but its rework seemed to have few fans in the end. It's at around 2% pick rate for most of the league in softcore, although it did gain some fans in hardcore, it seemed, at least. What sort of goals do you have, like larger ascendancy changes like that, and do you feel like the Chieftain hit the mark?
2%'s not bad, to be honest. It's still, 10 times higher, 20 times higher than what it was. Or maybe even infinitely higher, because I think it was 0.0% for a while. Obviously rounding. But honestly, I would say it didn't quite hit the mark, but like there's a fine line to tread when it comes to ascendancy balance. Like 2% is probably less of a failure than 25%. Because if everyone's playing it, it's ridiculous. Or we go back to like Slayer Cyclone era where there's 51% or something. I'm going off POE Ninja numbers, obviously, so high level players.
Sto dicendo 2% è meglio che il 25%, perché vuol dire che
that's within a kind of like realm of acceptability. But yes, I would say like in an ideal world, it would have been a little bit better than what it was. So, but geez, it's hard to get that perfectly right, like for sure. But yeah, and obviously if something does get used in hardcore and sees more use there, that is something we'd like
probabilmente una
to see.
risposta un po' politica questa, però
whether or not it's
ci sta.
intentional or accidental,
Nel senso, qualcuno lo usa, non è la sentenza più forte del gioco.
Discovering what's best, like we don't plan around that kind of thing, but yeah.
Is it something you're gonna
Scusate, ma
continue
sono quasi le 2,
working
io
on
comincio a
then?
avere
Like,
sonno.
not Chieftain specifically, but also just in general, trying to get something right with those pre-existing ascendancies?
It'll every so often it's going to come up where we rebalance a given set of them, or maybe we do a like wide sweeping numerical changes, or maybe we take two and completely redesign them, or take one and redesign it. But again, it's all at the expense of something else, and we just have to weigh those decisions. Like again, there's no time to do that when you have 100 to 200 between there of transfigured gems to make. It's the same people doing those things, so We just have to make those choices as to
E
what we
non
want
hai
to
il
do, and
tempo di
maybe there is
farlo,
a
quindi non hanno
better
toccato le ascendancy. Quindi
metagame thing
ragazzi,
we
il
could be doing.
Pathfinder
But
a
eventually, we're going
palla,
to
le
circle
skill non
back
le
to
hanno
them, and we're going to
toccate.
rebalance them or remake
Quello
them.
che
Yeah.
funzionava la
And do
scorsa
that.
lega funziona ancora sta
Yeah,
lega.
well, yeah, technically, yes, there are new ascendancies.
Quindi
Yes.
Pyroclast Mine anche sta lega.
Awesome stuff. Thank you very much for spending so much time with
O
us for
col
Q&A
dot.
today. We did run a bit over time. I appreciate that, and it was a pleasure to talk to you all.
Ho già
Thank you,
cambiato
Chris,
4 build da
Jonathan,
quando è
and
partito
Mark.
l'annuncio per
Thank
sta
you.
Very
lega.
much, Ziggy.
Giusto per farvi capire
It was
Thank
great
you.
to talk to you.
And I
quanto
hope
sto
to see
impazzendo.
some epically crazy builds on release day.
Yeah, awesome stuff.
Pyroclast Mine non funziona
Thanks
bene
very much for watching, folks.
All right. Awesome. Thanks.
Grazie che è finito, perché io ho bisogno di andare a guardare le patch notes. Subito shop, la prima cosa che mi fai vedere. Ario lo stronzo, vai benissimo te. Find out more. Medium wide. Madonna, cioè, ma guarda sta roba. No, io faccio questa, prendo Barskin, no, perché non era Barskin. Non prendo questa, prendo questa. Prendo questa. No, non era questa. Inventory slot. Ciao. No, era nel primo, No, era qua Barskin, no? Barskin, ok. Barbaro, Massimo. Cioè, non so quanto sia utile. Vabbè, quello ci guardiamo poi un'altra volta. Transfigure Gem. Press Kit. Oh. Finalmente fighi. Questo è fighissimo, ragazzi. Madonna. Non ci sono le patch notes. Non ci sono le patch notes. Dai, dammi le patch notes. Find out more. Get a free secure box and spend money. Questa la voglio. Fino a dicembre 5. Ok, perfetto. Live stream. Patch notes. Ok, poi volevo vedere se c'erano i nuovi pacchi. No, ci sono ancora quelli vecchi. Questi qua sono quelli vecchi. Fammi vedere le patch notes. Allora, facciamo quello che bisogna fare tutto. Sion. The Ranger and Sign, audio dialogue, ok. Basta. Cioè, tutto quello che mi hai toccato dal Sion è questo. E comunque non c'è più Divergent Determination, eh. Come lo faccio io l'Armor Stacker adesso? Porca, Absolution? Ok, Alchinisma. 10%. Oh, carino questo, Armageddon Brand. Aspetta, ci sta. Va bene. Beh, stanno buffando abbastanza. Solo cioè, hanno fatto la quality. Blade Ball. Vediamo sto tiri al knife come è messo. Prima 5 hits, adesso 8% hits in ailment. Minchia. Quindi potrebbe essere decente anche a livellare adesso. Com'è che era? Se devo guardare con la C. Vabbè, non lo so ragazzi, sto morendo. Andiamo qua. Raga, è stata un'emozione pazzesca. Io sono partito con l'idea di fare un'oretta dalle 11 a mezzanotte, sono le l'1:55, ho finito un attimo fa le patch notes. Mi raccomando, voi ricordatevi di prendere le ali e farò un riassunto delle cose più importanti, penso, non ne sono sicuro. Più che altro farò, non so niente. Oggi non dico cosa farò perché non so niente, è stato uno shock. È la cosa più figa del mondo e basta. Cioè, figa del mondo. E noi ragazzi ci vediamo per la 323. Ciao!